Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Marcus Ironbridge, and I've walked these Tennessee mountains for 16 years as a park ranger. In all that time, I've pulled 47 people out of caves alive. I always figured that was a pretty good record. I wish I'd never gone for 48. It was late October 1971 when the call came in about 3 missing cavers in Raven's Gorge. The fog was rolling thick through the valleys that morning, and the first frost had turned the leaves brittle underfoot. I remember thinking it was perfect weather for staying inside with coffee and paperwork. But 3 expert cavers don't just disappear. Sarah Chen, Mike Rodriguez, and Tommy Walsh had been exploring the deep limestone system for 2 days. They were supposed to check in every 12 hours. That was 72 hours ago. I grew up in these mountains, third-generation Appalachian. My granddad used to tell stories about the old Cherokee bone singers who lived in the caves before the white settlers came. Said they could make music with human bones that would call spirits from the earth. I never believed any of that nonsense. My brother Danny used to laugh at those stories too, before he died in a cave-in when I was 20. That's why I became a ranger. That's why I spent 16 years learning every inch of these underground systems. I figured if I knew the caves well enough, I could keep other families from losing what I lost. The Cherokee National Forest stretches for miles, but Raven's Gorge is special. The limestone there goes down over 800 feet, with passages that twist and turn like a maze. Some of the chambers are big enough to hold a church. Others are so narrow you have to crawl on your belly for hundreds of yards. The missing cavers had permits for the deep system. These weren't weekend warriors with cheap flashlights. Sarah was a geology professor from the university. Mike had been caving for 20 years. Tommy knew these particular caves better than almost anyone except me. So, when my radio crackled to life at 6 a.m. with news they were missing, I knew something was seriously wrong. "Marcus, we need you at Raven's Gorge," said Patricia Hawkins, my partner for the last 8 years. "The rescue team's already on site, but they want you to lead the search." I pulled on my gear and drove the 35 miles of winding mountain roads to the gorge. The deeper you go into these mountains, the more the modern world falls away. Cell phone towers can't reach past the ridgelines. Radio signals bounce weird off the rock faces. When something goes wrong out here, you're truly on your own. The rescue team was waiting at the main cave entrance when I arrived. 6 volunteers, all experienced cavers, plus Patricia. They'd already been down once, but hadn't found any sign of the missing group past the first big chamber. "Their gear is still at base camp," Patricia told me, pointing to 3 sleeping bags and cooking supplies set up near the cave mouth. "But all their cave equipment is gone. Ropes, lights, everything." I checked my own equipment one more time. Petzl headlamp with fresh batteries, 11mm dynamic rope, Sunto compass, VHF radio. The radio probably wouldn't work once we got deep, but procedure was procedure. "Okay," I said to the team. "We go in pairs. 15-minute radio checks. Nobody goes off alone. Patricia, you're with me. We'll take the main passage down to the bone chamber." That's what the locals called the deepest part of the system. Supposedly, it was where the Cherokee used to hold their ceremonies. I'd been down there dozens of times over the years. It was just a big round room with some old rock formations that looked kind of like human bones if you squinted and used your imagination. As we geared up, I noticed the cave mouth seemed unusually quiet. Normally, you could hear water dripping or bats moving around, or just the general sounds of a living cave system. Today, there was nothing. The kind of quiet that presses against your eardrums like water. "You notice how still everything is?" Patricia asked, adjusting her headlamp. "Yeah," I said, "probably just the weather. Cold front sometimes affects cave acoustics." But even as I said it, I didn't quite believe it. In 16 years of cave rescue work, I'd developed pretty good instincts about when something felt wrong. And this felt very wrong. We entered the cave at 8:15 a.m., our lights cutting through the darkness ahead. The main passage started wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side then gradually narrowed as it descended. The limestone walls were smooth and pale, worn by centuries of underground water flow. About 200 feet in, Patricia grabbed my arm. "Marcus," she whispered, "do you hear that?" I stopped and listened. At first, there was nothing. Then, very faintly, I heard it too. Humming. Human voices, humming in harmony. It was coming from somewhere deep in the cave system, echoing off the walls in a way that made it impossible to tell exactly where it originated. The melody was strange, almost hypnotic. It reminded me of the old Cherokee songs my grandmother used to sing, but sadder somehow. Lonelier. "That's got to be them," I said, though something in my gut was telling me it wasn't. "Come on." We moved deeper into the cave, following the sound. But as we descended, I noticed other things that didn't make sense. The temperature was all wrong. October in these mountains, the deep caves should be around 55 degrees. Today, it felt closer to 75. And there was a smell I couldn't identify. Sweet, like flowers, but with an undertone that reminded me of very old bones. We'd been underground for about an hour when we found the first rope. It was hanging from a crack in the ceiling, perfectly positioned to help climbers reach a higher passage. But according to my maps, that passage was a dead end. I'd been up there myself 3 years ago. It went back maybe 30 feet and stopped at a solid rock wall. "Did you put this here?" Patricia asked, testing the rope's strength. "Never seen it before," I said, but the rope was good quality, the same type the missing cavers would have brought. Maybe they found something we missed. The humming was louder now, definitely coming from above us. Patricia started climbing first, with me following. The passage was exactly as I remembered it. Narrow, sloping upward, carved smooth by ancient water flow. Except now it didn't stop at a rock wall. Where the dead end should have been, there was an opening. A perfectly round hole in the stone, just big enough for a person to crawl through. Warm air flowed out of it, carrying that strange, sweet smell. "This wasn't here before," I said, running my hands around the opening. The stone was smooth, natural looking. But I'd mapped this cave system myself. There was no passage here. "Caves change," Patricia said, though she sounded as confused as I felt. "Water finds new ways through, rock shifts." I wanted to believe that, but limestone doesn't just dissolve overnight. Changes like this take centuries, maybe thousands of years. The humming was definitely coming from beyond the opening. We crawled through, our lights revealing another passage that sloped down into darkness. This one felt different from the rest of the cave, older somehow. The walls had markings carved into them that looked almost like letters, but not in any alphabet I recognized. "Cherokee?" Patricia asked, pointing at the symbols. "Maybe, or older." My grandmother had told me stories about people who lived in these mountains before the Cherokee, people who went underground and never came back out. We followed the passage for maybe 100 yards before it opened into a chamber I'd never seen before. It was huge, bigger than any room in the mapped cave system. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above our headlamps. And the walls? The walls were covered in human bones, not scattered randomly, but arranged in perfect patterns. Spirals and circles and designs that seemed to move when you looked at them directly. Some of the bones were old, yellowed with age. Others looked fresh, still white and clean. "Jesus," Patricia whispered. In the center of the chamber, 3 figures sat in a perfect triangle. They weren't moving, weren't making the humming sound we'd been hearing. But even from across the room, I could see they were wearing the same type of caving gear our missing people had brought. "Sarah? Mike? Tommy?" I called out. No response. As we got closer, I could see why. They were dead, had been for a while, from the look of it, but that was impossible. They'd only been missing for 3 days. These bodies looked like they'd been here for weeks, maybe months. Their bones were visible through their decomposed flesh. And those bones were singing. I know how that sounds. I know it's impossible. But I could see it with my own eyes. The bones in their rib cages were vibrating, creating the harmonic humming we'd been hearing. Their skulls were tilted back, jaws open, as musical tones poured out of their empty mouths. Patricia stumbled backward, hitting the wall. Several of the arranged bones fell to the floor with a sound like wind chimes. "We need to get out of here," she said. "We need to get out right now." I wanted to agree with her. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run. But I'm a park ranger. These people had been in my territory, under my protection. Whatever had happened to them, I needed to understand it. I approached the closest body, Sarah, based on the university ID still clipped to her gear. Her eyes were gone, but her skull was intact. As I watched, her jaw moved slightly, and a low musical tone emerged from her throat. That's when I noticed the other bones around the chamber responding. They were all vibrating now, all adding their voices to the song. The sound was getting louder, more complex. What had started as simple humming was becoming a full chorus. And I recognized the melody. It was the same song my grandmother used to sing to me when I was little. The Cherokee death chant, meant to help spirits cross over to the next world. "Marcus," Patricia said, her voice tight with fear. "Look at the walls." The bone patterns were moving. Not falling or shifting, but actually rearranging themselves. Spirals were becoming circles. Circles were becoming symbols that hurt to look at directly. And as they moved, they were spelling out words in that strange alphabet. I couldn't read them, but somehow I understood their meaning. Asterisk. Join the song. Asterisk. Patricia was already crawling back toward the passage we'd come from. "Marcus, we're leaving. Now." I took one more look at Sarah's remains. Her skull had turned to face me directly, and for just a moment, I could have sworn I saw intelligence in those empty eye sockets. As if something was looking back at me. That's when I heard the voice I'd been trying not to think about for 19 years. "Marcus," my dead brother Danny whispered from Sarah's skeletal mouth. "Don't leave me alone down here." I ran. Patricia and I scrambled through the passage, past the impossible opening, down the rope, and back toward the main cave system. But we weren't alone anymore. The humming followed us, echoing off the walls, seeming to come from every direction at once. And underneath the melody, I could hear voices. Human voices, singing words in Cherokee that my grandmother had taught me long ago. Songs about the bone singers who lived beneath the earth. Songs about joining the eternal chorus of the dead. We made it back to the main passage, but our radio check with the surface team got no response. Just static, mixed with what sounded like very faint singing. "The others," Patricia panted. "We need to find the rest of the rescue team." But as we moved through the cave system, calling their names, we found only their equipment. Headlamps sitting on rocks, still turned on but with no one wearing them. Ropes tied in perfect knots around formations that would serve no climbing purpose. And everywhere, scratched into the cave walls and fresh marks, were those same symbols we'd seen in the bone chamber. Join the song. The humming was getting louder. We found the first rescue team member in the passage that led to what cavers called the cathedral. A massive chamber with formations that looked like church pillars. His name was Jeff Morrison, a volunteer firefighter who'd been caving for 15 years. He was sitting cross-legged in the center of the passage, perfectly still, his headlamp casting a circle of light on the floor in front of him. From behind, he looked like he was just resting, maybe taking a water break. From the front, you could see that his chest cavity was open and empty. His ribs were gone, not broken or torn out, but cleanly removed, as if by a surgeon. The bones that should have been protecting his heart and lungs were arranged in a perfect spiral pattern around his body. And they were singing. Each rib was vibrating at a different frequency, creating a complex harmony that made the cave walls themselves seem to hum in response. Jeff's body showed no signs of struggle, no blood, no trauma, just the impossible absence of bones that were now making music on the limestone floor. "How is he still sitting up?" Patricia whispered. I didn't have an answer. Without ribs, without the bone structure to support his torso, Jeff should have collapsed. But he sat there perfectly upright, his empty chest cavity moving slightly as air flowed through it, creating a sound like wind through a flute. That's when his head turned toward us. His eyes were still there, still aware. His mouth moved, trying to form words, but only musical tones came out. He was trying to tell us something, but his voice had become part of the bone song. Patricia grabbed my arm. "Marcus, his ribs. Look at his ribs." The spiral of bones around Jeff's body was slowly expanding, reaching toward us, not rolling or being pushed, but moving with purpose, as if they were alive. As they moved, they left scratches in the stone floor. Scratches that formed letters. Asterisk. "Your turn." Asterisk. We backed away, but the humming was coming from behind us now too. The other missing team members were somewhere in the cave system, and their bones were joining the chorus. "The exit," I said. "We need to get back to the surface." But as we retraced our steps toward the cave entrance, we found our path blocked. Not by rock or debris, but by patterns. Bone patterns, identical to the ones we'd seen in the deep chamber, except these were made from the skeletons of animals. Deer, bears, smaller creatures I couldn't identify. All arranged in perfect geometric designs that seemed to shift and flow when we looked at them directly. And all of them singing. The cave system itself was changing. Passages that should have led up toward the entrance now curved down into darkness. The familiar landmarks I'd used for 16 years were gone, replaced by new formations that looked like they'd been there for centuries. "We're lost," Patricia said, though we both knew it was more than that. We weren't lost. We were being herded. Every time we tried to find a way out, we encountered more bone patterns, more singing skeletons. The melody was getting more complex, more beautiful, and more terrible. It was starting to get inside my head, making it hard to think clearly. I could hear my brother Danny's voice more clearly now, not just in the skeletal remains, but echoing through the cave system itself. "Remember the song Grandmother taught us?" he was saying, "about the bone singers who collect musicians for their eternal orchestra? You always said it was just a story." "Danny's dead," I told Patricia. "My brother died 19 years ago." "I know," she said, but she was looking at me strangely, and I realized I'd been talking to empty air. That's when we found the rest of our rescue team. They were in the cathedral, all 4 of them, arranged in a perfect circle around the central formation. Like Jeff, they were sitting upright with their chest cavities open, their ribs removed and placed in intricate patterns around their bodies. But these 4 were still alive. Tom Bradley, our youngest volunteer, saw us first. He tried to wave, but his arm movements were jerky, unnatural. When he opened his mouth to speak, only musical tones came out. His larynx had been replaced with something that looked like carved bone. The others were in various stages of the same process. Maria Santos was missing her spine, but somehow still sitting upright, her vertebrae arranged in a line that led to a dark opening in the cave wall I'd never seen before. Rick Palmer's skull had been opened, his brain replaced with a collection of small bones that chimed like bells when he moved his head. Sarah Kim, the most experienced caver on our team, was almost completely transformed. Most of her skeleton was gone, her body held together by something I couldn't understand. But she was still conscious, still aware. When she saw us, tears ran down her cheeks as she tried to mouth words her bone-replaced vocal cords couldn't produce. The patterns around them were moving faster now, becoming more complex. And I realized what I was looking at wasn't random decoration. It was sheet music. The bones were arranged to show rhythm, harmony, tempo. The entire cave system was being turned into a massive musical score, with human skeletons as the instruments. "They're still alive," Patricia said. "We can still save them." But even as she said it, we could see it wasn't true. Tom's remaining flesh was slowly dissolving, being replaced by more bone structures. Maria's organs were being carefully removed and set aside, leaving only the parts necessary to keep her brain functioning. They were being transformed, not killed, converted into living instruments for something that had been waiting in these caves for a very long time. That's when I saw the figures moving in the shadows beyond our lights. They were tall, impossibly thin, and seemed to be made entirely of bone. But these bones moved with fluid grace, as if held together by more than just joints and ligaments. They wore the shapes of humans, but they were clearly something else, something very old. Patricia's light caught one of them full on. Its skull was human, but elongated, with eye sockets that seemed to go back forever. Its rib cage was open like a harp, with thin bone strings stretched between the ribs that vibrated in the cave's air currents. Its hands had too many fingers, each one ending in a point that could have been a claw or a musical notation tool. When it saw our light on it, the creature smiled. Its teeth were all different sizes, arranged like organ pipes, and when it opened its mouth, the most beautiful and terrifying sound I'd ever heard filled the cave. It was calling the others. More bone singers emerged from the darkness. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Some looked like they had once been Cherokee, based on the bone jewelry and carved decorations they wore. Others seemed older, from cultures that had lived in these mountains before recorded history began. And some looked fresh, recent additions to their eternal chorus. "The missing cavers," I whispered. Sarah, Mike, and Tommy. They were there, transformed but still recognizable. Their skeletons had been carefully recrafted into new instruments. Sarah's ribcage had become a complex wind instrument, with her breathing providing the airflow. Mike's leg bones had been turned into percussion instruments, striking against the cave walls in rhythm with the song. Tommy's skull had been opened and fitted with bone strings, turning his head into a living violin. But their eyes were still human, still aware, still in pain. The bone singers began moving toward us, their movements creating new harmonies as different parts of their skeletal instruments vibrated. The music was hypnotic, beautiful in a way that made you want to stop running and just listen. I could feel it working on me. My legs were getting heavy. My thoughts were becoming fuzzy. The urge to sit down and join the music was getting stronger. Patricia was affected too. She'd stopped backing away and was just standing there, swaying slightly to the rhythm of the bone song. "Patricia," I said, shaking her shoulder, "we need to move." But when she turned to look at me, her eyes were different, glassy, unfocused. She opened her mouth to speak, but what came out was a perfect musical tone that harmonized with the bone singers' chorus. I was alone. The bone singers surrounded me, their music filling the cave, filling my head, promising peace and beauty, and an end to the loneliness I'd carried since Danny died. All I had to do was stop fighting and let them add my bones to their eternal song. I almost gave in. The music was so beautiful, so perfectly harmonized, that resisting it felt like fighting against something natural and good. The bone singers moved closer, their skeletal forms swaying in rhythm, and I could see the intricate artistry of their construction. These weren't random monsters. They were craftsmen, artists, musicians who had found a way to make their art eternal. Patricia was already beginning to change. Her skin was becoming translucent, and I could see her ribs starting to separate from her chest, getting ready to be removed and repurposed. She looked peaceful, even happy. "Join us, Marcus," she said, but her voice had that musical quality now, like she was singing instead of speaking. "Danny's waiting for you," and he was. I could see my brother among the bone singers, his skeleton beautiful and terrible. His ribcage opened into a complex harp that sang with each breath of cave air. He looked exactly as I remembered him, but made of bone and music and something that might have been magic. "I've been alone down here for so long," Danny's voice said, though it came from all the bone singers at once. "But now we can be together forever." For a moment, I wanted that more than anything. 19 years of guilt and grief, gone. Replaced by eternal music and the company of my brother. Then I remembered my grandmother's voice, teaching me and Danny the old Cherokee songs when we were kids. Not just the death chants and the bone singer stories, but the protection songs too. The ones that were meant to keep spirits at bay. "Grandmother told us more than just stories," I said to Danny's skeleton. "She taught us how to fight back." I started singing. Quietly at first, because I wasn't sure I remembered all the words. It was a song she'd made us learn, but told us never to use unless our lives depended on it. A song that was older than the Cherokee Nation, passed down from the people who lived in these mountains before recorded history began. The bone singers stopped moving. Their music faltered, becoming discordant. I sang louder, my voice cracking but gaining strength. The Cherokee words came back to me, along with their meaning. It was a song about iron, about the metal that spirits couldn't touch, about staying in the world of the living instead of joining the world of the dead. The bone singers began backing away, their forms becoming less solid, more like wisps of bone-colored smoke. But Danny's skeleton moved forward instead of back. "You can't leave me alone again," he said, and I could hear the desperate loneliness in his voice. "I've been waiting so long for someone to join the song." "I never left you," I said, tears running down my face as I continued singing the protection chant. "I became a ranger because of you. I learned these caves to honor you, but I can't become bones and music. I have to stay alive." The Iron Ranger badge on my chest was getting warm, almost hot. My grandmother had told me that iron disrupted spirit magic, but I'd never really believed her. I pulled the badge off and held it toward Danny's skeleton. Where the metal touched his bones, they became solid and real, instead of mystical and flowing. For just a moment, he looked like my brother again, instead of an impossible musical instrument. "I understand," he said, his voice normal now instead of singing. "But Marcus, they're not going to let you leave." The other bone singers had recovered from my protection song. They were moving again, closing in from all directions. Their music was angry now, discordant and threatening instead of beautiful and hypnotic. Patricia was almost completely transformed, her skeleton beginning to separate from her flesh. The missing cavers and rescue team members were being absorbed into the walls of the cave, becoming part of the architecture itself. I could sing the protection song, but it only worked for a few minutes at a time. And I was one person with a small iron badge against dozens of ancient spirits who had been collecting musicians for centuries. That's when I realized what my grandmother had really been trying to teach us. The protection song wasn't meant to fight the bone singers. It was meant to give you time to escape. But you couldn't escape by running. You had to disrupt their entire operation. The cave system itself had become their instrument. The walls, the formations, the passages, everything was positioned to create perfect acoustics for their eternal concert. If I could damage that, maybe I could break their power. I looked up at the cathedral's ceiling, where massive stalactites hung like frozen music. If those came down, they'd shatter the carefully arranged acoustics of the chamber. I pulled out my climbing gear and started setting charges. Not real explosives. I didn't carry those, but compressed air cartridges from my emergency kit. If I could position them right and trigger them all at once, the pressure change might be enough to destabilize the rock formations. The bone singers realized what I was doing and began moving faster, their music becoming urgent, desperate. But I was already climbing, using techniques I'd learned in 16 years of cave rescue work. Patricia, still partially transformed, tried to stop me. "Marcus, don't destroy the music," she sang. "It's so beautiful." "I know," I said, because it was beautiful. But beauty that requires death isn't really beautiful at all. I reached the ceiling and began setting my charges around the largest stalactite formations. Below me, the bone singers were climbing the walls with impossible grace, their skeletal forms flowing upward like smoke given structure. Danny's voice called to me one last time, "If you destroy this place, I'll be alone forever." "No," I said, activating the first charge. "You'll be free to move on." The compressed air exploded outward, sending shockwaves through the limestone. Cracks appeared in the ceiling, spreading like spider webs. The perfect acoustics that had taken centuries to develop began to collapse. The bone singers' music became chaotic, losing its harmony as the cave's resonance changed. Their forms started to flicker and fade, like radio signals losing reception. I triggered the rest of the charges in sequence, and the cathedral's ceiling began to fall. Tons of limestone crashed down, smashing the bone patterns, destroying the careful arrangements that had turned human skeletons into musical instruments. The sound was deafening, drowning out the bone singers' chorus completely. In the dust and chaos, I saw Patricia suddenly solid again, her transformation reversing as the spirits lost their power. The rescue team members were becoming human again, too, their stolen bones returning to their bodies. But the cave system was collapsing around us. "Everyone move!" I shouted, though I could barely hear my own voice over the sound of falling rock. We ran through passages that were closing behind us, past chambers that were folding in on themselves. The carefully preserved cave system that had been home to the bone singers for centuries was destroying itself as their magic failed. Some of the spirits tried to follow us, but they were just wisps of smoke now, unable to maintain their skeletal forms without the cave's perfect acoustics to give them power. We reached the main passage, just as the entrance began to collapse. Patricia and the surviving rescue team members made it out first. I was the last one through, diving into daylight just as the mountain sealed itself shut behind me. The bone singers were trapped inside, along with their eternal concert and their terrible, beautiful music. But not all of them. The official report said it was a geological incident. Caves are unstable, rock shifts, sometimes whole systems collapse without warning. It happens in limestone country. The families of the missing cavers received compensation from the Park Service for the unfortunate accident that claimed their loved ones. I never told anyone the truth about what we found down there. Patricia doesn't remember most of it. The doctors said her memory loss was probably due to the head injury she received when the cave collapsed. She knows we went in to rescue people and had to run when the mountain started falling, but the details are fuzzy. The other rescue team members remember even less. Tom Bradley thinks he fell and hit his head in the dark. Maria Santos recalls getting separated from the group and being scared until she heard voices calling her back to the exit. None of them remember having their bones removed or being transformed into living instruments. I think that's probably for the best, but I remember everything. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind blows through the mountains just right, I can still hear the music. Faint echoes of that perfect, terrible harmony drifting up from the sealed cave system. The bone singers are still down there, still trying to create their eternal concert, but the acoustics are all wrong now. Their music is broken, discordant, sad. I feel guilty about that sometimes. They were ancient spirits, older than human civilization in these mountains. They were artists, in their own way, creating something beautiful that could have lasted forever. And I destroyed it. But then I remember Patricia's face when her ribs were being pulled from her chest, still conscious, still aware. I remember the missing cavers, transformed against their will into living instruments. I remember my brother, Danny, trapped for 19 years in a form made of bone and music and loneliness. Beauty that requires unwilling sacrifice isn't really beautiful at all. The Cherokee elders I've talked to since then, quietly, carefully, without mentioning specific details, tell me I did the right thing. They say the bone singers were spirits that had lost their way, consuming human lives to maintain their existence, instead of moving on to whatever comes after death. Some music is meant to end, one elder told me. That's what makes it precious while it lasts. I'm still a park ranger, still walking these mountains, still pulling people out of dangerous situations. But I carry iron now, not just my badge, but iron nails in my pockets, iron cleats on my boots. And I've learned more of my grandmother's protection songs, the ones she said to save for when my life depended on it. Because the Raven's Gorge system isn't the only cave complex in these mountains. And the bone singers weren't the only old spirits living beneath the earth. 3 months after the collapse, a family of hikers went missing near Laurel Creek Caverns. When we found them, they were sitting in a perfect circle, humming an old Cherokee melody none of them had ever heard before. Their bones were still inside their bodies. For now, the music never really ends in these mountains. It just changes form, finds new instruments, adapts to new circumstances. And somewhere in the sealed darkness of Raven's Gorge, ancient voices are still trying to call new singers to join their eternal song. I can hear them sometimes when I'm alone in the caves, faint and broken, but still beautiful in their terrible way. And sometimes, in the deepest chambers where the rock formations create perfect acoustics, I hear a familiar voice singing harmony. "Thanks for setting me free, Marcus," Danny whispers in the darkness. "But I'll always be here if you need me." The bone singers of Raven's Gorge are contained now, their power broken, their victims freed. But they're not gone. They're just waiting, learning, adapting. And every time someone goes missing in the deep caves of Cherokee National Forest, I wonder if they've found a way to start their concert all over again. 2. The Mist Walkers of Whisper Mountain. My name is Elizabeth Thornwood, and I spent 12 years tracking predators in these mountains before I learned what real monsters look like. People think being a park ranger is all about helping lost hikers and putting out campfires. They don't know about the 3 a.m. calls when something kills livestock in ways that don't make sense. They don't know about the reports that make your skin crawl, the ones you file away and hope never to see again. The Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia hold secrets older than the roads that wind through them. I've walked these trails since I was 22, fresh out of college, with a zoology degree and big dreams about saving wildlife. Now I'm 34, and I've relocated over 200 black bears. I know every ridge, every hollow, every place where civilization gives way to something wilder. Widow's Peak sits 50 miles from the nearest town. It's the kind of place where your radio goes dead and your cell phone becomes a useless piece of plastic. The old logging camp up there has been empty since the 1,920 seconds, when the company just packed up and left. Local folks say the workers disappeared one winter, but that's just mountain talk. People love their ghost stories around here. The Melungeon families who lived in these mountains before anyone else had different stories. They talked about things that wore faces that weren't their own. Shapeshifters, skinwalkers, whatever you want to call them. I always figured it was just old superstition mixed with too much moonshine. That changed on January 15th, 1984. The call came in just after dawn. 3 hikers had made it down from Widow's Peak in the middle of the night, half frozen and talking crazy. They said they'd seen bears walking on 2 legs, wearing human faces. The dispatcher sounded tired when she called me. "Liz, we got another weird one. Probably just spooked city folks, but you better check it out." I loaded my gear into the truck tranquilizer gun loaded with Telazol, GPS tracking equipment, my .300 Winchester Magnum for emergencies. The weather report called for a blizzard moving in from the west. I had maybe 6 hours before the roads became impossible. The drive up to Widow's Peak takes 2 hours on a good day. The road twists through forests so thick you can't see the sky. Every mile takes you further from cell towers and closer to the kind of quiet that makes city people nervous. I'd made this trip dozens of times, but something felt different that morning. The trees were too still. No birds, no squirrels, none of the usual mountain sounds. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I found the hikers' campsite 3 miles up the trail. Their tent was still there, abandoned with all their gear inside. Food scattered everywhere, sleeping bags torn to shreds. Whatever had visited them in the night had been looking for something. That's when I saw the first tracks. Bare paws, clear as day, in the mud beside the creek. But 50 feet later, they changed. The paw prints became human footprints, like someone had stepped out of bare feet and walked away on 2 legs. I'd never seen anything like it in 12 years of tracking. I took photos, measured the prints, tried to think of logical explanations. Maybe 2 different animals had passed through. Maybe the mud was playing tricks with my eyes. Maybe the hikers had been running around in their bare feet during whatever had scared them. But deep down, I knew I was looking at something impossible. The temperature was dropping fast. Snow started falling in thick, wet flakes that stuck to everything. I had to make a choice: head back to town before the storm hit, or follow the trail and see where it led. I followed the trail. The tracks led me up through the old logging area, past rusted equipment and collapsed buildings. The higher I climbed, the quieter it became. Even the snow seemed to fall without sound. I'd been hiking for an hour when I found the first skin. It was hanging from a tree branch like a shirt left out to dry. But it wasn't cloth. It was the complete hide of a white-tailed deer, turned inside out and stretched on a wooden frame. The skin was perfectly preserved, with every detail intact. Someone had removed it with surgical precision. My hands shook as I photographed it. This wasn't normal hunting practice. This was something else entirely. The trail camera I'd set up here 6 months ago was still working, solar battery keeping it alive through the winter. I pulled out the memory card, hoping it had caught whatever was happening up here. The first dozen photos showed normal wildlife: deer, raccoons, a few black bears passing through. Then the images started getting strange. Frame 847. A black bear approaching the camera at 2:30 a.m. Frame 848. The same bear, but standing on its hind legs. Frame 849. The bear reaching up with human hands. Frame 850. Empty forest. Frame 851. A naked human figure walking away from the camera. I went through the photos 3 times, checking the timestamps, looking for equipment malfunction. The camera had captured something impossible: a bear transforming into a person, or a person transforming into a bear. The wind picked up, carrying a smell I didn't recognize. Sweet and chemical, like leather soaking in formaldehyde. I followed my nose deeper into the trees. That's when I found the tanning operation. Hidden in a grove of pine trees, someone had built a series of wooden racks. Dozens of skins hung from them: deer, bear, fox, and others I couldn't identify in the growing darkness. They were all preserved with the same careful technique, stretched and treated until they looked almost alive. But some of the skins weren't from animals. I found 3 human hides hanging next to a black bear pelt. The skin was hairless and pale, stretched and preserved just like the animal skins. Hands, feet, even the face, everything intact and carefully prepared. My training kicked in. I documented everything with photos, took GPS coordinates, tried to think like a professional instead of a terrified human being. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The snow was coming down harder now. I needed to call this in, get a search and rescue team up here, contact the state police. But my radio was nothing but static, and my cell phone showed no signal. I was completely alone. That's when I heard the voice calling my name. Elizabeth? Elizabeth Thornwood? I turned toward the sound. A figure was walking toward me through the snow, tall, wearing a Park Service uniform. As he got closer, I could see his face clearly. Thomas Ashworth. My backup ranger, the guy who'd covered my shifts when I got sick last month. Relief flooded through me. Tom, thank God you're here. You need to see this. There's something really wrong happening up here. He smiled, but something about his expression made my stomach turn. His teeth were too white, and his eyes didn't match his smile. I know, Elizabeth. I've been watching for a while now. What do you mean, watching? He stepped closer, and I noticed he wasn't wearing any cold weather gear. Just a summer uniform, like he'd walked up here in July instead of January. No jacket, no gloves, not even a hat, but he didn't seem cold at all. How long have you been up here, Tom? Oh, not long, just since this morning. He gestured toward the skins hanging in the trees. Beautiful work, isn't it? Takes real skill to preserve them this well. The chemical smell was getting stronger. I looked closer at Tom's uniform, and my blood went cold. The name tag was wrong. It said Ashworth, but the letters looked hand-carved, like someone had made it themselves. The badge was slightly off-center. The shirt fit too perfectly, like it had been tailored specifically for him. Tom, we need to get out of here. There's a blizzard coming, and I found evidence of... I know what you found, Elizabeth. His voice was different now, deeper, with an accent I couldn't place. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I stepped backward, my hand moving toward the pistol on my belt. You're not Tom Ashworth. The thing wearing Tom's face tilted its head like a curious animal. No, it said, I'm not. I ran. My feet slipped in the snow as I crashed through the trees, heading back toward the trail. Behind me, I could hear laughter that didn't sound human. Not Tom's laugh. Something else, trying to copy how humans laugh. I made it maybe 50 yards before I realized my mistake. In my panic, I'd run deeper into the forest instead of back toward my truck. The trees pressed close on all sides, and the snow was falling so thick I could barely see 10 feet ahead. My radio crackled with static, then cleared just long enough for a voice to come through. Elizabeth, this is Thomas Ashworth. Do you copy? I stopped running. That was Tom's voice, his real voice, not the thing that had been wearing his face. Tom, where are you? I'm at base camp. Got your message about the strange tracks. I'm heading up with backup, but this storm is getting bad. What's your location? I looked around at the darkening forest. I don't know. I'm lost. Tom, there's something up here. Something pretending to be you. Don't trust anyone who says they're a ranger. Static filled the radio for a long moment. Elizabeth, are you feeling all right? You sound confused. Just stay put, and we'll find you. Tom, listen to me carefully. What did I bring you for your birthday last year? Silence. Tom? The radio was dead. I tried my cell phone again, still no signal. The snow was getting deeper, and the temperature was dropping fast. I needed shelter, and I needed it soon. The old logging camp was somewhere up ahead. If I could find it, I could wait out the storm and figure out what was happening. I followed what looked like an old road, hoping it would lead me to the buildings. The road led to something, all right? But it wasn't abandoned. Lights flickered between the trees, oil lamps and candles, casting dancing shadows on the snow. I could hear voices, multiple people talking in low tones. The chemical smell was stronger here, mixed with wood smoke and something else. Something that smelled like meat. I crept closer, staying in the trees. The old logging camp had been rebuilt. Not restored, rebuilt with materials that didn't match the original construction. New wooden buildings sat next to old stone foundations. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys. Through the windows, I could see people moving around inside, at least a dozen of them, all wearing different clothes, different faces. But something was wrong with the way they moved. Too smooth, too coordinated, like they were all following the same rhythm. I watched a woman walk past one of the windows. She was young, maybe 25, with long dark hair and pale skin. She was carrying something in her hands, a folded bundle of cloth. Except it wasn't cloth, it was skin. She shook it out like a bedsheet, and I saw arms, legs, a human torso. She held it up to the light, examining it carefully, then carried it to another room. Through another window, I saw an old man sitting at a table. He had a pile of faces in front of him, actual human faces, preserved like masks. He picked one up and held it against his own face, checking the fit. When he pulled it away, his features had changed completely. I understood then what I was looking at. A family of shapeshifters, living in the mountains, collecting human skins to wear as disguises. The missing hikers, the preserved hides, they were building a collection. My phone buzzed. Somehow, I had signal. A text message from Tom Ashworth. Found your truck. Where are you? Storm getting worse. I typed back quickly. At old logging camp. Multiple suspects. Send backup. The reply came immediately. On my way. Don't engage. I put the phone away and tried to think. If Tom was really coming, I needed to warn him about what was up here. These things could look like anyone, sound like anyone. How would we tell the difference? That's when I saw myself walk past the window. It was my face, my hair, my uniform. The thing was wearing my skin like a costume, moving around inside the building like it belonged there. I watched myself talk to the old man, saw him hand my face a bundle of fur, a bear skin. I watched my own face smile as it held up the bear hide, testing the weight of it. Then it walked toward the back door, coming outside, coming to find me. I had two choices. Run into the storm with no shelter and probably freeze to death, or find a way to fight. I checked my weapons, tranquilizer gun, pistol, and a knife. Nothing that seemed adequate for fighting shape-shifting monsters. But I remembered something from the old Melungeon stories my grandmother used to tell. Skinwalkers could be hurt by silver and fire. They were tied to their stolen skins, damaged the skin, and you damaged the creature wearing it. I didn't have silver bullets, but I had something else. I pulled out my emergency flare gun, loaded with a magnesium round that burned at 3,000 degrees. If I could hit one of these things while it was wearing a stolen skin, maybe I could hurt it enough to escape. The back door of the main building opened, and my own face looked out into the snow. Elizabeth? It called in my voice. Elizabeth? Are you out there? It's me, it's you. We've been looking for you. The thing wearing my skin stepped out into the snow. In the lamplight, I could see it wasn't perfect. The face was a little too tight, the movements slightly off, like someone wearing a mask that didn't quite fit. Come inside, Elizabeth. It's warm in here. We have food and dry clothes. You must be so cold. I raised the flare gun, aimed at the center of its chest, and pulled the trigger. The magnesium round hit my stolen face dead center and exploded in white fire. The creature screamed a sound like animals in pain mixed with human voices crying out. It clawed at its chest as the fake skin burned away, revealing something underneath that hurt to look at. The scream brought others running out of the buildings. More faces I recognized: Tom Ashworth, the missing hikers, people from town I'd seen but never met, all wearing stolen skins, all moving toward me with inhuman speed. I ran toward the deepest part of the forest, as the whole camp erupted in angry voices behind me. The chase lasted 3 hours. They followed me through the snow, calling out in familiar voices, trying to trick me into stopping. I heard my mother calling my name, my ex-husband apologizing for things that happened years ago, my dead father telling me to come home. But I kept running. The storm was getting worse. The wind screamed through the trees, and the snow was piling up knee-deep. I was leaving an easy trail to follow, but I had no choice. If I stopped moving, I'd freeze to death before they caught me. I found shelter in a shallow cave about a mile from the camp. It wasn't much, just a depression in the rock face, but it got me out of the wind. I huddled there with my remaining gear, trying to think of a plan. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Tom. Can see your tracks. Following now. Stay where you are. I wanted to believe it was really him, but I couldn't take the chance. Instead, I sent back. Prove you're really Tom. What did we talk about during your divorce? The reply took several minutes. His drinking. You said Sarah was right to leave me, but I should try to stay in the kids' lives. You made coffee and let me cry on your couch for 3 hours. That was Tom, the real Tom. Where are you? I texted back. Half-mile south of your position. Can see your tracks leading to the rocks. What the hell happened up here? I was about to text back when I heard voices approaching through the storm. Multiple people, all calling my name in different voices. They'd found my trail. I checked my weapons, 1 round left in the flare gun, 6 bullets in my pistol, the tranquilizer gun with 2 darts. Not enough for a whole family of monsters. The voices were getting closer. I could make out individual words now. Elizabeth, where are you? We just want to talk. Come out, wherever you are. That last voice was wrong, too playful, like a child's game instead of an adult conversation. These things didn't really understand human behavior, they just copied what they observed. I saw lights bobbing through the trees. Oil lamps, not flashlights. They were hunting the old way, like they'd been doing for generations. Elizabeth, this voice was different. Urgent, worried, human. Tom's voice, coming from a different direction. Tom? I called back, keeping my voice low. Liz, thank God, where are you? I could see a flashlight beam cutting through the snow, moving toward my position. It looked like standard Park Service equipment, not the oil lamps the creatures were carrying. I'm in the rocks, I called back. Be careful, there's a whole family of them up here. The flashlight beam swung toward my voice. In the light, I could see Tom's face. He looked tired and scared, but it was definitely him. The way he moved, the way he held his shoulders, I'd worked with him for 5 years. This wasn't a copy. Jesus, Liz, what happened to you? I looked down at myself. My uniform was torn, covered in mud and blood. I'd lost my hat somewhere, and my hands were scratched from fighting through brush. They're called skinwalkers, I said as he climbed up to my shelter. They wear human skins like clothing. I saw them, Tom. They had my face. He stared at me for a long moment, probably wondering if I'd lost my mind. Then he saw something in my expression that convinced him. How many? At least a dozen, maybe more. They've been hunting people, collecting skins. The missing hikers, they're all dead. Tom checked his radio. Static. He tried his phone, no signal. We need to get out of here, he said. Can you walk? Before I could answer, the voices stopped. The forest went completely silent. Even the wind died down. In the distance, I could see lights moving through the trees, but they weren't making any sound at all. They know you're here, I whispered. Tom checked his service weapon, a .40 caliber pistol with a full magazine. Will regular bullets hurt them? I don't know. Fireworks. Silver, maybe. The old stories say, a voice called out from the darkness, maybe 50 feet away. Thomas Ashworth? Is that you? It was my voice. The thing wearing my stolen skin had survived the flare gun. Elizabeth? Tom called back. Don't answer. I grabbed his arm. It's not me. Of course it's you, my own voice replied. Tom, she's confused. The cold is making her think strange things. I'm right here. Through the snow, I could see a figure approaching. It looked exactly like me. Same height, same build, same uniform. If I didn't know better, I would have believed it was me. Elizabeth, come out of there, the fake me said. You're scaring Tom. Tom raised his pistol, pointing it toward the approaching figure. His hands were shaking. How do I know which one is real? The fake me smiled. Ask us something only the real Elizabeth would know. I thought fast. Tom, what happened the night we found that injured bear cub last spring? You insisted on staying up all night to bottle feed it, he said. Sarah called the next morning wondering why I didn't come home. Wrong, said the fake me. We took it to the wildlife center in Waynesboro. Tom went home to his family like he was supposed to. Tom's gun wavered between us. The fake version of me was lying, but it sounded confident. In the stress of the moment, he might not remember clearly. Tom, I said quietly, look at its feet. He glanced down. The fake Elizabeth was standing in the snow wearing summer boots, the same uniform boots I'd had on when these things first saw me. But I was wearing winter hiking boots now, the ones I'd changed into before hiking up here. The real Elizabeth would have changed her footwear for the snow, I said. Tom nodded and aimed his pistol at the imposter. The thing wearing my face stopped smiling. When it spoke again, its voice was different, older, with that strange accent I couldn't place. You cannot stop us, young ones. We have walked these mountains since before your people came. We will walk them long after you are gone. Like hell, Tom said, and pulled the trigger. The bullet hit the fake Elizabeth in the chest. Instead of falling, it staggered backward and began to change. The stolen skin split and peeled away, revealing something tall and gaunt underneath. Its real face was long and narrow, with too many teeth and eyes that reflected light like an animal's. It screamed in pain and rage, then turned and ran back into the darkness. Did that kill it? Tom asked. I don't think so. We need to get out of here. Now. We left the shelter and started working our way back toward where Tom had parked. But the creatures weren't done with us. They followed us through the storm, staying just out of sight, calling out in the voices of people we cared about. They had learned not to get too close, but they were hurting us. Every time we tried to take a direct route, they would appear and force us to change direction. Slowly, they were driving us back toward their camp. They're playing with us, I realized. Then let's stop playing. Tom pulled out his emergency flare and struck it. The red flame hissed to life, casting wild shadows through the snow. You want to hunt us? He shouted into the darkness. Come and get us. The creatures rushed us then, coming from all sides. I counted at least 8 of them, all wearing different stolen faces. Tom threw his flare at the closest one, and it burst into flames, screaming and rolling in the snow. I emptied my tranquilizer gun into another one. The dart didn't kill it, but the chemicals made it stagger and fall. Tom was shooting with his pistol, trying to keep them back while I reloaded. But there were too many of them. Just when I thought we were finished, I heard the sound of engines in the distance. Snowmobiles, coming up the mountain fast. Back up, I shouted over the wind. State police, Tom replied. I called them before I came up here. The skinwalkers heard the engines too. They melted back into the forest, vanishing like smoke. Within minutes, we were alone in the snow, with nothing but our own blood and the smell of burning flesh to prove what had happened. The state police found us an hour later, half frozen and barely conscious. We spent 3 days in the hospital being treated for exposure and shock. The official report listed the incident as a wildlife encounter. Rabid animals, probably. The logging camp was empty when the search teams got there, just old buildings and no sign of habitation. The preserved skins I'd photographed had vanished. Even my trail camera photos were gone, the memory card corrupted. Tom backed up my story, but without evidence, there wasn't much anyone could do. The area around Widow's Peak was quietly closed to hikers during winter months. Safety concerns due to extreme weather conditions. I went back to work after a month of mandatory leave. Tom transferred to a different district, said he needed a change of scenery. I don't blame him, but I know they're still up there. Last winter, 3 more hikers went missing in the same area. The search teams found their equipment but never found them. The report blamed an early blizzard and difficult terrain. I've started keeping silver bullets in my service weapon. Call it superstition if you want, but I've learned to trust the old stories. The Melungeon families knew something. We forgot some things. In these mountains are older and stranger than we want to believe. I still work the Blue Ridge Parkway, still answer calls about problem wildlife, but I'm more careful now about who I trust. Sometimes I'll be talking to a fellow ranger or a local resident, and something will feel wrong about their voice, their movements, the way they wear their own skin. When that happens, I ask questions only the real person would know. And I keep my hand close to my weapon, because somewhere up on Widow's Peak, in buildings that appear and disappear like mountain mist, a family of creatures continues their ancient trade. They collect faces and voices, learning to walk among us undetected. They've been doing it for generations, and they're getting better at it. I know because last month I saw myself buying groceries in town. Same face, same voice, same mannerisms. The clerk didn't notice anything strange, rang up the purchase with a smile, and wished me a good day. But I was at home that day, 50 miles away, filing reports. They're not just hiding in the mountains anymore. They're walking among us, wearing our faces, living our lives. The skin trade is expanding, and I don't know how to stop it. I just know that sometimes, late at night, I get text messages from Tom Ashworth. He asks how I'm doing, if I remember what happened up there, if I ever think about going back. But Tom Ashworth moved to Oregon 6 months ago and changed his phone number. Whoever is texting me, they want me to know they're still watching, still learning, still collecting. And someday soon, they'll have enough faces to walk freely in our world, perfect copies of people we trust. By then, it will be too late to tell the difference between the hunters and the hunted. The skin trade of Widow's Peak continues, and business is good. My name is Samuel Coleridge, and I've been a park ranger for 18 years. Most of that time has been spent here in Daniel Boone National Forest, managing the old coal mining sites scattered throughout these Kentucky hills. People think it's boring work, checking fences, updating historical markers, making sure nobody falls down an old mine shaft. They're mostly right. Until last October, the strangest thing I'd encountered was a family of raccoons that had made their home in an abandoned mining office. I should probably mention that my daddy was a coal miner. Died when I was 12 in a collapse over in Harlan County. Maybe that's why I ended up taking care of these old sites. Felt like I owed something to the miners who worked here, died here. My mother always said I was trying to make peace with ghosts, but I never believed in that kind of thing. The Black Damp Hollow site sits about 15 miles from the nearest paved road, deep in a valley that seems to catch fog like a bull catches water. It's what's left of a company town called Prosperity, though there wasn't much prosperous about it from what I can tell. The mine operated from 1889 to 1894, then shut down after what the records call geological instability. That's a fancy way of saying the mountain tried to swallow the whole operation. The town itself is mostly foundations now. 12 people still live there, mostly elderly folks whose families never left after the mine closed. There's Martha Crowley, who runs a tiny general store that's more museum than business, and her brother Tom, who knows more about local mining history than anyone has a right to. The rest keep to themselves. What makes Black Damp Hollow different from my other sites is the mine itself. Most old coal mines around here are sealed with concrete or steel barriers. This one still has the original timber supports, blocking the main entrance, though they've been reinforced over the years. The shaft goes down about 200 feet, then branches into a network of tunnels that follow the coal seam. According to the old maps, there are at least 6 different levels, all connected by a central shaft. On October 15th, I got a call from the Forest Service dispatch. 3 spelunkers had reported hearing voices calling for help from inside the sealed mine. They'd been camping near the entrance the night before and heard what sounded like men shouting for rescue. The voices came from deep inside the mountain, they said. When they tried to get closer to help, they couldn't find any way past the timber barriers. I drove out there that afternoon, figuring I'd find evidence of kids playing pranks or maybe somebody's radio picking up CB chatter from truckers on the interstate 20 miles away. The mountain has a way of carrying sounds in strange directions. The mine entrance sits at the bottom of a steep hollow, surrounded by oak trees that were already losing their leaves. The old timber barriers looked solid, 12 by 12 posts set deep in concrete, with steel mesh filling the gaps. Nobody had been through there recently. But when I got close to the entrance, my breath started showing like it was January instead of October. I checked my thermometer, 68 degrees in the sunshine 20 feet from the mine, 42 degrees right at the entrance, a 26-degree difference with no explanation. That should have been my first warning. I spent 2 hours that day checking the perimeter, looking for other openings the spelunkers might have mistaken for the main shaft. Found nothing except old air vents, all properly sealed. The whole site felt wrong somehow, though I couldn't put my finger on why. The woods were too quiet. No bird sounds, no squirrels chattering. Even the flies seemed to avoid the area near the mine. Driving home that evening, I told myself it was nothing. Temperature differences near mines aren't unusual. Underground air stays cool year-round. The silence was probably just seasonal, animals preparing for winter. The voices the spelunkers heard were probably wind moving through old timber, creating sounds that seemed human in the darkness. I almost believed it too. The next morning brought a call that changed everything. Martha Crowley phoned the ranger station before dawn, her voice shaky with something between fear and excitement. "Samuel, you need to get out here. Something's happened at the mine." I made the drive in record time, arriving to find Martha standing at the mine entrance with her brother Tom and 2 other locals. They were all staring at something I couldn't quite process. Someone had arranged mining tools in front of the sealed entrance. A pickaxe, a mining lamp, a coal bucket, and several hand tools, all laid out in neat rows like a display. The items looked old but well maintained, the metal clean and oiled. "Were these here yesterday?" I asked. Tom shook his head. "Ground was clear yesterday evening when I walked my dog past here. Found them this morning, just like this." I knelt down to examine the tools. The pickaxe was a beautiful piece, wooden handle worn smooth by decades of use, steel head sharp enough to cut coal. The mining lamp was the type used in the 1890 seconds, brass and glass with a wick system for burning oil. It was filled and ready to light. "These belong to anyone in town?" "Nobody's used tools like this for 40 years, Martha said. "My grandfather had similar ones, but they're hanging in my store. Have been, for decades." I stood up and looked at the assembled group. Martha and Tom were both in their 70s, born and raised in Black Damp Hollow. The other two men, brothers named Pete and Joe Kinzer, were in their 60s and had lived here their whole lives too. Any ideas how these got here? Same way the voices got in the mine, Pete said quietly. I spent the rest of the morning photographing the tools and checking for footprints. The ground around the mine was soft from recent rain, but I found no human tracks. No tire marks from vehicles. No indication anyone had walked through the area carrying equipment. What bothered me most was the condition of the tools. They looked like they'd been used recently. Coal dust in the crevices of the pickaxe head, oil fresh in the lamp's reservoir. But these were antique tools, museum pieces. Nobody had used equipment like this for decades. I decided to take the mining lamp back to my office for closer examination. The moment I picked it up, it felt warm in my hands. Not hot, just body temperature, as if someone had been holding it recently. That afternoon, I called the state archaeologist to report the find. Dr. Rebecca Hayes drove out the next day to examine the site and remaining tools. She confirmed they were period pieces from the 1,890 seconds, exactly the type used in this mine during its operational years. Samuel, these tools are worth thousands of dollars to collectors, she told me. The lamp alone is museum quality. Nobody just leaves items like this sitting outside. Could they have been buried here? Maybe exposed by rain? The brass would be green with corrosion after a century underground. This lamp looks like it was polished yesterday. Dr. Hayes took detailed photographs and measurements, then loaded the tools into her truck. As we worked, neither of us mentioned the temperature drop near the mine entrance. Neither of us talked about how our voices seemed muffled when we got within 10 feet of the timber barriers. But I could see in her eyes that she felt it too, the wrongness that hung over this place like morning fog. That night, I took the mining lamp home with me. I set it on my kitchen table while I made dinner and tried to think through logical explanations for what was happening. Someone was playing an elaborate prank. Kids from town had found a cache of old tools and decided to mess with the ranger. Maybe there was a historical reenactment group in the area. Around 11 o'clock, as I was getting ready for bed, the lamp started glowing. Not the wick. The brass itself began giving off a soft, warm light. I watched it from across the room, my heart hammering against my ribs. The glow pulsed gently, like breathing. After about 5 minutes, it faded back to normal. I should have called someone, should have reported it to my supervisor, or Dr. Hayes, or even Martha Crowley. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table until dawn, watching an antique mining lamp that glowed without fire, and remembering stories my father used to tell about miners who never made it out of their last shift. The next morning, I drove back to Black Damp Hollow with the lamp in my passenger seat. I had to know what was happening at that mine. I had to understand why a piece of 1,890 seconds mining equipment was behaving like it was alive. I should have stayed home. The lamp started glowing again the moment I parked near the mine entrance. This time, the light was brighter, more focused. As I carried it toward the sealed opening, the glow intensified until I could read by it like a flashlight. Martha met me at the mine site, carrying a thick folder of papers. I spent all night going through my grandfather's records, she said. Found something you need to see. She opened the folder and pulled out a yellowed newspaper clipping from 1,894. The headline read, Prosperity Mine Disaster Claims 73 Lives, Rescue Efforts Abandoned. I've heard about the disaster, I said. Geological instability caused a collapse. That's what they reported. But look at this. She handed me another document. A handwritten letter dated 3 weeks after the disaster. My great-grandfather wrote this to a lawyer in Lexington. Never sent it. I read the letter by the lamp's strange light. Asterisk. The truth about what happened at Prosperity Mine must be told. The collapse was no accident. Mr. Hensley and his partners sealed those men inside deliberately, flooding the lower tunnels to collect insurance money. 73 miners trapped below with no way out. We could hear them calling for help for days, but Hensley had armed guards keeping us away. Said it was too dangerous for rescue attempts. By the time we convinced the sheriff to investigate, the voices had stopped. Company claimed the men died in the original collapse, but we know better. They starved down there, or drowned when the flooding reached their level. Asterisk. My hands started shaking as I read. The mining lamp's glow brightened, casting dancing shadows on the ground around us. Why didn't your great-grandfather send this letter? Hensley owned half the county back then. Judges, sheriff, newspaper editor, all in his pocket. Speaking out meant losing your job, your home, maybe your life. Martha's voice was barely a whisper. But the miners never forgot. Every family in Black Damp Hollow lost someone in that mine. As she spoke, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Voices calling from inside the mountain, faint but distinct, men shouting for help. "Do you hear that?" I asked. Martha nodded, tears in her eyes. "They've been calling for help for 130 years, Samuel. Nobody ever came." The voices grew louder. I could make out individual words now. "Help us. We're trapped. Someone get us out of here." They came from deep inside the mine, echoing up through 200 feet of rock and timber. I pulled out my radio and called Forest Service dispatch, asking for an emergency rescue team. Even as I made the call, I knew how crazy it sounded. Requesting rescue for men who had died before my grandfather was born. While we waited for the rescue team, the voices continued. Sometimes they were loud enough that Martha and I looked at each other in shock. Other times they faded to whispers that might have been wind, but they never stopped completely. The rescue team arrived 2 hours later, 4 men with equipment for cave rescue and emergency medical response. The team leader, a guy named Rodriguez I'd worked with before, looked skeptical when I explained the situation. "You're hearing voices from inside a sealed mine shaft? Just listen." We all stood silent for 30 seconds. Nothing. Rodriguez started setting up equipment to check air quality and structural integrity around the mine entrance. As his team worked, I noticed the temperature around the mine was dropping. My breath started showing again, and frost formed on the metal mesh covering the entrance. "Sam, you need to see this," Rodriguez called out, staring at his atmospheric monitoring equipment. The readings made no sense. The device showed oxygen consumption patterns consistent with multiple people breathing inside the mine. Carbon dioxide levels indicated active respiration from dozens of individuals. But the mine had been sealed for over a century. "Equipment malfunction?" I asked. Rodriguez shook his head. "I tested it this morning. Everything's working perfectly." As we watched the impossible readings, the voices started again. This time, all 5 of us heard them clearly. Men calling for help, pleading for rescue, their voices carrying up from the depths of the mountain. Rodriguez grabbed his radio. "Base, we have a possible rescue situation at the Black Damp Hollow mine site, requesting additional teams and equipment for tunnel breach." But as his team began setting up cutting equipment to remove the timber barriers, something happened that stopped us all cold. One voice separated itself from the others, clearer and closer than the rest. "Sammy, Sammy, is that you, son?" I nearly dropped the mining lamp. I knew that voice. Hadn't heard it in 30 years, but I'd know it anywhere. "Daddy," I whispered. "I'm here, son. We're all here. Been waiting so long for someone to come help us." Rodriguez and his team were staring at me like I'd lost my mind. But Martha stepped closer and put her hand on my shoulder. "Your father died in a mine collapse," she said quietly. "Harlan County, 30 years ago. But that's impossible. He's not. He can't be. Down here with us, Sammy." My father's voice called from the sealed mine. "Come help us get out. We've been trapped so long." The mining lamp in my hands blazed with light so bright it hurt to look at. The frost on the mine entrance spread, covering the timber barriers in a sheet of ice. And from deep inside the mountain, 73 voices began calling my name. Rodriguez ordered his team to cut through the timber barriers. Whatever was happening here was beyond normal rescue protocols, but we couldn't ignore clear calls for help, even if those calls defied everything we understood about reality. The cutting torch had barely touched the first timber when the mountain shook. Not an earthquake, something moving inside the mine itself, like a giant taking a breath. The voices stopped abruptly, leaving a silence so complete it hurt my ears. Then the mining lamp in my hands went out. "Everyone back away from the entrance," Rodriguez ordered. But it was too late. The timber barriers exploded outward in a shower of splinters and ice. A wall of freezing air rushed from the mine opening, carrying with it the smell of coal dust, methane, and something else, the wet, sweet odor of decay. Through the gaping mine entrance came light. Not electric light or sunlight, but the warm glow of dozens of mining lamps, bobbing and weaving as if carried by walking men. The lamps moved in formation up the main shaft, getting closer with each passing second. "What the hell?" Rodriguez started to say. then stopped as the first miner emerged from the darkness. He was tall and thin, wearing overalls and a cloth cap, his face covered in coal dust. The mining lamp attached to his cap cast a circle of light around him as he stepped into the afternoon sun. Behind him came another miner, then another, until dozens of men were walking out of the sealed mine. They looked exactly like what they were, coal miners from 1894. Their clothes were period accurate, their tools and equipment perfectly preserved. They moved with the careful, economical motions of men who had spent their lives working in confined spaces underground. But they weren't solid. I could see through them like looking through heavy smoke. And when they spoke, their voices echoed from impossible distances. "Sammy," my father's voice called, though he wasn't among the miners I could see. "You came for us." The lead miner, a bearded man with kind eyes, approached me directly. When he spoke, his words seemed to come from the mine shaft behind him rather than his mouth. "Samuel Coleridge, son of James Coleridge, who died in the Harlan mine." "How do you know my father?" "He's down there with us now, trapped like we've been trapped. All the miners who died in cave-ins, explosions, floods, were all connected. All waiting for someone to tell the truth." Martha stepped forward, her voice shaking. "What truth?" "The truth about what Hensley did. About how we really died." The ghostly miner gestured toward the mine entrance. "He didn't just seal us in for insurance money. He flooded the lower levels while we were still alive, then claimed we died in a collapse. 73 men drowned in the darkness, calling for help that never came. Rodriguez and his team had backed away to their trucks, watching the impossible scene unfold. I didn't blame them. I wanted to run too, but something kept me rooted in place. Maybe it was the mining lamp in my hands, now glowing again with soft light. Maybe it was the sound of my father's voice echoing from the depths. "Why now?" I asked. "Why are you appearing after all these years?" "Because someone finally came who could hear us. Someone who lost family the same way we did." The ghostly miner's eyes fixed on mine. "Your father died because mine owners cut corners on safety, same as always. You became a ranger to protect these places, to keep the memories alive. You're the one who can help us find peace. How? Tell the truth, all of it. Make sure people know we didn't die in an accident. We were murdered for money." As he spoke, more miners emerged from the shaft. I could see through them, but they were undeniably real. Real enough to leave footprints in the soft ground, real enough to disturb fallen leaves as they walked. One of the newer arrivals looked familiar, and my heart almost stopped when I recognized him. "Daddy?" James Coleridge stepped forward, looking exactly as he had 30 years ago. Same weathered hands, same crooked smile, same coal dust that never quite washed off his skin. "Hello, son. You've grown up good." I reached toward him instinctively, but my hand passed through empty air. He was there, but not there. Real, but not real. "I don't understand. You died in Harlan County. Death doesn't change what we are, Sammy. Miners look out for each other, in life and after. These men have been trapped here for over a century. I came to help them find their way home." The ghostly miners began moving toward the town, their lamps creating a procession of lights through the trees. They walked slowly, deliberately, like men heading home after a long shift. "Where are they going?" "To show you where the evidence is buried," my father said. "Hensley hid documents that prove what really happened. Letters, financial records, witness statements. If you can find them and make them public, we can finally rest." The procession stopped at the foundation of an old building near the center of town. The lead miner pointed to a specific spot, then looked back at me. "Under the company store." Hensley buried the truth, but the truth doesn't stay buried forever. As I watched, the ghostly miners began to fade. Their lamps dimmed, their forms became more transparent, until only their voices remained. "Tell our story, Samuel Coleridge. Tell the world how we really died." And then they were gone, leaving only the smell of coal dust and the echo of mining lamps in the darkness. It took 3 days to convince the State Historical Society to authorize an excavation beneath the old company store foundation. Dr. Hayes returned with a full archaeological team, drawn by my description of period mining tools and Martha's family documents. Rodriguez never filed an official report about what he witnessed. His team members agreed to describe the incident as equipment malfunction during atmospheric testing. But Rodriguez pulled me aside before leaving and said something I'll never forget. I've been doing rescue work for 15 years. Whatever those men needed, they got it. I hope they're at peace now. The excavation team found exactly what the ghostly miners had promised. Buried in a lead-lined box beneath the company store foundation were dozens of documents. Insurance policies taken out on miners' lives just weeks before the disaster. Correspondence between Hensley and his business partners discussing controlled flooding, and witness statements from townspeople who heard the trapped miners calling for help for days after the supposed collapse. The most damning evidence was Hensley's own handwritten confession, apparently prepared for a lawyer but never delivered. In it, he admitted to deliberately flooding the lower mine levels to collect insurance money, knowing full well that miners were still alive below. He described hearing their voices echoing up from the flooded tunnels and posting guards to prevent rescue attempts. The confession ended with a single line: "God forgive me, but the money was worth more than their lives." Dr. Hayes called it the most significant archaeological discovery in Kentucky mining history. The documents were donated to the state archives, and the story of the Black Damp Hollow massacre was finally told in full. A memorial was erected at the mine site, listing all 73 victims by name. Martha Crowley provided most of the names from her family's records, stories passed down through generations of survivors. I continued working as a ranger at Black Damp Hollow, but the place was different now. The oppressive silence was gone, replaced by normal forest sounds. The temperature around the mine entrance stabilized. Wildlife returned to the area around the memorial, and I never heard the voices again. But sometimes, when I'm doing maintenance work around the memorial, I find small things that shouldn't be there. A pickaxe left leaning against a tree. Coal dust scattered on the memorial stone in patterns that look like signatures. Fresh flowers that nobody in town will claim to have left. I think the miners are still here, but peacefully now. No longer trapped, no longer calling for help. Just watching over the place where they lived and died, making sure their story is never forgotten again. The mining lamp sits on my office desk now, no longer glowing with supernatural light. It's just an antique tool, a piece of history. But every once in a while, usually on quiet autumn evenings when the fog settles heavy in the hollow, I catch a faint reflection in its brass surface, the image of men walking home after their final shift, their work finally done. People ask me sometimes if I really believe in ghosts. I tell them I believe in justice, in truth, and in the bonds that connect working people across time and death. Whether you call that supernatural or just human nature doesn't much matter to me. What matters is that 73 murdered men finally got to tell their story. And somewhere in the darkness beyond death, a son got to see his father one last time. The mountain is quiet now, but it's a good quiet. The kind that comes after a long carried burden has finally been set down. My name is Rebecca Silverbrook, and I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 14 years. In all that time, I've helped find 89 missing children. I know the mountains like my own backyard, and I know how to bring kids home safe. But what happened at Blind Creek in the summer of 1962 changed everything I thought I knew about these mountains. I used to be a social worker before I became a ranger. Saw too many kids hurt by the world, so I figured protecting them in the wilderness would be easier. The mountains don't lie or cheat or break promises. They just are what they are. Blind Creek sits in a deep valley, about 25 miles from any paved road. You can only get there on foot, following an old Cherokee trail that winds through pine forests, so thick the sun barely touches the ground. The creek got its name because it dead ends into a wall of limestone cliffs. Water just disappears into cracks in the rock. Local Cherokee folks have stories about that valley. They call it the home of the moon-eyed people, pale beings who lived underground before humans came to the mountains. Joseph Walkingstick, who helps us with cultural stuff, told me those stories were just old myths. Ways to explain things people didn't understand back then. I believed him. I should have listened closer. The trouble started on June 21st, the longest day of the year. 3 families were camping near the creek as part of our junior ranger program. Good families. The Hendersons from Nashville, the Pratts from Knoxville, and the Williamses from Chattanooga. They'd been coming to our programs for years. That morning was strange from the start. Usually the valley buzzes with life, birds singing, insects humming, squirrels chattering in the trees. But when I hiked down to check on the campsite, everything was dead quiet. Not peaceful quiet, wrong quiet, like the whole valley was holding its breath. The air felt thick and hot, even though we were in deep shade. No breeze at all, which was weird for that elevation. My skin kept prickling like someone was watching me, but every time I turned around, nothing was there. The families seemed fine when I got to their camp. Kids were excited about the day's activities: Sea Creek exploration, rock hunting, learning to identify animal tracks. Normal stuff. But I noticed their parents looked tired, like they hadn't slept well. Strangest thing, Tom Henderson told me while his wife packed lunch. Kids kept talking in their sleep last night, all three of them. Couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like they were having the same conversation. I figured it was just excitement. Kids do weird stuff when they're camping. Around noon, I led the three children, Amy Henderson, 8 years old, Marcus Pratt, 10, and little Sarah Williams, just 6, down to the creek to look for fossils. The water was lower than I'd ever seen it, probably because of the hot, dry summer we'd been having. That's when we found the stones. Where the water had dropped, you could see perfectly round stones arranged in circles on the creek bed. Not natural formations, these were placed by hand. Each circle was about 6 feet across, and they were all connected by lines of smaller stones, like some kind of pattern or message. Who made these? Amy asked, kneeling down to touch one of the stones. Probably just rocks that got washed around, I said, but I didn't believe it. The pattern was too perfect, too deliberate. Marcus waded deeper into the creek, following the stone lines. There's more over here. Look, Miss Rebecca. I followed him and felt my breath catch. The pattern stretched underwater as far as I could see, disappearing into the dark pools near the limestone cliffs. Hundreds of stones, all arranged with impossible precision, and they were warm. Not sun-warmed. These stones felt like they had heat coming from inside them. Can we collect some? Sarah asked, reaching for a smooth white stone that seemed to glow in the dark water. Don't touch them, I said quickly, though I couldn't explain why. Something about those stones made my skin crawl. We spent the afternoon looking for regular fossils upstream, but my mind kept going back to those patterns. Who could have made them? When? And why did they feel so important, like they were trying to tell me something? As evening came, the wrongness in the valley got stronger. The silence pressed down like a heavy blanket. Even the creek seemed to flow more quietly than usual. The families gathered around their campfire, but the flames flickered strangely, casting shadows that moved the wrong way. I radioed back to headquarters to report everything normal, but my voice sounded hollow in the dead air. That night, I camped nearby in my ranger station, really just a small cabin with a radio and basic supplies. I should have slept fine. I was tired enough, but something kept me awake. A sound like children singing, so faint I couldn't be sure I was really hearing it. When I finally dozed off near dawn, I dreamed of pale children with silver eyes, playing games I didn't understand in caves that sparkled like stars. I should have known then, should have packed everyone up and hiked them out of that valley, but I didn't. And by the next morning, all 3 children were gone. I woke up to screaming. Tom Henderson's voice cracked as he shouted my name across the valley. I grabbed my radio and flashlight and ran barefoot from my cabin to their campsite, my heart pounding harder with each step. All 3 parents stood around the cold remains of their campfire, still in their pajamas. The Pratts were holding each other and crying. Mrs. Williams kept calling Sarah's name into the empty woods. "They're gone," Tom said when he saw me. His face was white as paper. All 3 kids. We woke up and they were just gone. The children's sleeping bags were empty but not disturbed, like they'd simply vanished into thin air. No signs of struggle, no sounds in the night. At least none the parents remembered. I radioed for backup immediately. Within 2 hours, we had search and rescue teams, K9 units, and a helicopter circling the valley. Standard procedure for missing children in the wilderness. But nothing about this felt standard. The dogs picked up the children's scent trail easily enough. It led straight from the campsite down to the creek, following the same path we'd taken the day before, right to where those strange stone patterns were. And then the trail just stopped. Dogs are acting weird, Jake Morrison, our lead K9 handler, told me. His German Shepherd, Rex, was whining and backing away from the water. Won't go past this point. Never seen him refuse to track before. I knelt down where the scent trail ended. We were right next to the stone circles I'd found yesterday, but something was different. The patterns were changed. New stones had been added, and the arrangements were more complex, like someone had been working on them all night. Or something. "Ma'am?" One of the search team volunteers, a college kid named Danny, was pointing upstream. "You need to see this." I followed him about 50 yards to where the creek made a sharp bend. There, clear as day in the soft mud, were 3 sets of small footprints. Bare feet, child-sized, Amy's, Marcus's, and Sarah's. I could tell by the size differences. But they weren't alone. Mixed in with the children's tracks were other prints. Same size, same shape, but different somehow. Too pale, like they'd been made by feet that had never seen sunlight, and they seemed to shimmer when I looked at them directly, becoming hard to focus on. "Those are weird prints," Danny said, kneeling next to me. "Look how they shine." As we watched, the strange footprints began to fade. Not like they were washing away, like they were dissolving back into the mud. Within minutes, only the children's tracks remained. "Did you see that?" I asked Danny. He looked confused. "See what?" I stared at him. He was looking right at the spot where the pale prints had been, but his eyes seemed to slide away, like his brain couldn't hold on to what he'd seen. The helicopter pilot reported something strange too. "Getting weird readings on my instruments when I fly over the creek," he radioed down. "Compass spins like crazy. Radio keeps picking up this high-pitched sound." I climbed up to a ridge where I could get better radio reception and called in more resources. We needed experts, more equipment, maybe even the FBI. 3 children don't just vanish without a trace. But as I was talking to the dispatcher, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. Down in the valley, near the tree line opposite the creek, children. 3 small figures in white clothing, barely visible through the trees. My heart jumped. "I see them," I shouted into the radio. "South side of the creek, about 200 yards from the campsite." I half ran, half slid down the rocky slope, calling for backup. But when I reached the spot where I'd seen the figures, there was nothing. Just empty woods and that unnatural silence. No footprints, no broken branches, no sign anyone had been there at all. False alarm. I had to radio back. Thought I saw movement, but it was nothing. Except I knew what I'd seen. 3 children in white clothes, holding hands, watching us search for them. The wrong part was their eyes. Even from that distance, even through the thick trees, I could see their eyes glowing like moonlight. As the day wore on, more searchers arrived. We had 30 people combing every inch of the valley. Professional trackers, local volunteers, even some Cherokee scouts that Joseph Walking Stick brought in. But the valley seemed to be working against us. Radios crackled with static, compass needles spun wildly near the creek. 3 different people reported seeing children in the trees, but when we investigated, we found nothing. The worst part was the feeling that we were being watched. All of us felt it. Experienced woodsmen who'd never been spooked by anything were jumping at shadows, looking over their shoulders, talking in whispers. Around sunset, we found something that made everyone stop talking. Marcus Pratt's backpack was hanging from a tree branch about 15 feet off the ground, not thrown there, placed there, carefully positioned so it wouldn't fall. There were no climbing marks on the tree. No way a 10-year-old could have reached that high. And the backpack wasn't damaged or dirty. It looked like it had been gently lifted up and set in place. Inside were Marcus's clothes, neatly folded, his sneakers, tied together with their laces. His favorite baseball card collection, arranged in perfect order, like someone had carefully undressed him and saved his belongings. "This doesn't make sense," Sheriff Brady said, examining the backpack. He was a tough old man who'd seen everything in 30 years of law enforcement, but his hands were shaking as he handled Marcus's things. That's when Joseph Walking Stick pulled me aside. "Rebecca," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something about this place, something my grandfather told me that I thought was just old stories." He glanced around to make sure no one else was listening. "The Cherokee have always avoided this valley during summer solstice. They say it's when the moon-eyed people come up from their underground homes, looking for new children to join them." I wanted to laugh, wanted to tell him that was just superstition. But I kept thinking about those pale footprints that had faded away, the glowing eyes I'd seen in the trees, the impossible way Marcus's backpack had been placed. "What do the stories say happens to the children?" I asked. Joseph looked uncomfortable. "They say the moon-eyed people take them below the earth." to crystal caves that never see sunlight. The children become like them, pale and glowing, with silver eyes. They're not hurt, but they're not human anymore either. That's impossible, I said. Is it? Joseph pointed toward the creek, where our searchlights were reflecting off the water. Look at what's happening here, Rebecca. Dogs that won't track, compasses that don't work, children who vanish without a trace. As if to prove his point, a new voice crackled over the radio. Danny, the college volunteer, sounded terrified. Base, this is Danny. I'm seeing lights underwater, bright blue lights moving around in the deep pools, and I think I hear kids laughing down there. I grabbed my radio. Danny, get away from the water. Now, but his radio had gone dead. We found him 20 minutes later, standing waist deep in the creek, staring down into the dark water like he was hypnotized. When we pulled him out, his skin was ice cold, despite the warm night. They were so beautiful, he kept saying. The children were so beautiful. They wanted me to come and play. He couldn't remember anything else. By the third day, everything had gone wrong. We had 50 searchers in the valley now, plus FBI agents and state police. But instead of getting closer to finding the children, things kept getting stranger and more dangerous. 2 more volunteers had to be pulled out of the creek after standing in the water for hours, staring at nothing. 3 searchers reported following the sounds of children laughing, only to find themselves lost in parts of the forest they swore hadn't been there before. And the equipment failures were getting worse. Radios died near the creek, flashlights flickered and went out. Metal compass needles snapped in half for no reason. I was running on coffee and fear, trying to coordinate the search while dealing with increasingly panicked parents and frustrated officials who wanted answers I couldn't give them. That's when Dr. Elizabeth Chen arrived. She was a geologist from the University of Tennessee, called in to examine the strange stone formations under the creek. Dr. Chen was a small, serious woman who didn't believe in anything that couldn't be measured and tested. She lasted exactly 2 hours before she came running out of the valley, white-faced and shaking. There are structures down there, she told me, grabbing my arm. Under the creek bed. Buildings or caves, I can't tell which. Made from some kind of crystalline material I've never seen before. She pulled out her camera and showed me the underwater photos she'd taken. The images were blurry and distorted, but I could make out angular shapes beneath the water. Walls and passages that definitely hadn't been carved by nature. The stones on the creek bed aren't random, Dr. Chen continued. They're markers. Like a map or directory showing the way into those structures. How old do you think they are? I asked. That's just it. They shouldn't exist at all. The material doesn't match any known geology in this region. And the craftsmanship. She shook her head. It's too advanced for anything built by prehistoric peoples. Before I could ask more questions, she grabbed her equipment and left. Refused to explain why, just packed up her gear and hiked out of the valley like something was chasing her. That evening, while the official search teams made camp, I met with Joseph Walkingstick and Sheriff Brady. We needed to talk about things that couldn't go in any official report. The Cherokee elders want everyone out of this valley, Joseph said. They say we're disturbing something that's been sleeping, and it's getting angry. Sheriff Brady lit a cigarette with shaking hands. I've seen a lot of weird things in these mountains over the years. But this, he gestured toward the creek. 3 kids don't just disappear, and volunteers don't stand in freezing water for hours talking to nothing. What if they're not talking to nothing? I said quietly. Both men looked at me. What if the children are down there, like the stories say? What if they're alive but changed, and they're trying to communicate? Before anyone could answer, we heard it. Singing, clear as day, coming from the direction of the creek, children's voices, harmonizing in a language I didn't recognize. We grabbed our flashlights and radios and headed toward the sound. But as we got closer to the water, our lights began to dim and flicker. The radios filled with static that sounded almost like whispered voices. The singing was definitely coming from underwater now, from the deep pools near the limestone cliffs where Dr. Chen had found the structures. Amy, I called toward the water. Marcus, Sarah, if you can hear me, we're here to help. The singing stopped abruptly. For a moment, the valley was silent. Then the water in the deep pools began to glow with soft blue light, like moonlight trapped underwater. 3 shapes rose slowly from the depths. I knew immediately they were the missing children, but they were different. Their skin was pale as milk, almost translucent. Their hair floated around their heads like they were still underwater. And their eyes were solid silver, reflecting light like mirrors. "Miss Rebecca?" Amy Henderson's voice sounded distant and echoey, like she was speaking from the bottom of a well. "We've been waiting for you." Sheriff Brady tried to step toward the water, but I grabbed his arm. Something about the children's posture, the way they moved, warned me not to get too close. "Amy, honey, your parents are worried sick," I called out. "We need to get you out of there." "We can't come out," Marcus said in that same hollow voice. "We belong to the Moon-Eyed people now, but we're not sad. It's beautiful down there." Little Sarah giggled, a sound like wind chimes in a breeze. "They have games we never dreamed of, Miss Rebecca. Games with light and water and time. We can play forever and never get tired." "Sarah, sweetheart, you need to come home," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Your mommy and daddy miss you." "The Moon-Eyed people miss their children too," Amy said. "They've been alone for so long, since the first humans came to the mountains. They just want playmates." As she spoke, more shapes began rising from the water behind the children. Tall, pale figures with the same silver eyes. Adults, I thought, but it was hard to tell. They moved like they were floating, and their faces were beautiful and terrible at the same time. "We have to go now," Marcus said, "but don't be sad. We're happy here. Happier than we ever were up there." "Wait." I splashed into the creek, not caring about the cold water. "You can't just take them. They're children. They belong with their families." One of the pale adult figures glided forward. When it spoke, its voice was like water flowing over stones. "They came to us willingly," it said. "The call of our kind is strong in young hearts. We offer them wonders beyond your understanding." "They're too young to make that choice," I said, wading deeper into the water. "They don't understand what they're giving up. And you don't understand what we're offering." The figure's silver eyes reflected my flashlight beam back at me. "But you could learn. You could come with us, Rebecca Silverbrook. You who protects children, help us protect ours." For a moment, I felt the pull of those silver eyes. The promise of mysteries beyond imagination, the chance to see wonders that no human had ever witnessed. But then I thought of the parents back at camp, Tom and Helen Henderson, crying themselves to sleep every night. The Pratts and Williamses, hanging on to hope that was dying a little more each day. "No," I said firmly. "These children need to come home." The Moon-Eyed people's expression didn't change, but the temperature of the water around me dropped suddenly. Ice began forming on the surface of the creek. "Then you choose to be our enemy," the figure said. "I choose to do my job," I replied, "which is protecting children." The pale figures began to sink back into the glowing water, taking Amy, Marcus, and Sarah with them. "Don't forget us, Miss Rebecca," Amy called as she disappeared beneath the surface. "And don't stop the other children from coming to play." The glow faded, the ice melted, the creek returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. But I knew everything had changed. Joseph and Sheriff Brady stood on the bank, staring at me with wide eyes. "Did that really happen?" Brady whispered. I waded back to shore, water streaming from my clothes. "It happened. And now we know what we're dealing with." "What are we going to tell the parents?" Joseph asked. I looked back at the dark water where 3 children had chosen magic over home, wonder over safety. "We're going to tell them we're bringing their kids back," I said, "whatever it takes." I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those silver eyes staring back at me. Heard Amy's voice saying the children were happier below. Around 3 in the morning, I gave up trying to rest. I put on my gear and hiked back to the creek alone, carrying my strongest flashlight and enough rope to rappel down into whatever caves or structures Dr. Chen had found. The parents had a right to know their children were alive, and the children had a right to make an informed choice about where they belonged. But I wasn't going down there unprepared. Joseph had given me an iron knife that had belonged to his great-grandfather. Cherokee stories say iron burns the Moon-Eyed people, he'd told me, probably just superstition, but I also carried a waterproof camera, emergency flares, and my radio, though I didn't expect it to work underground. The valley was different at night. The unnatural silence was deeper, more oppressive. Even my footsteps seemed muffled, like the darkness was swallowing sound. When I reached the creek, the water was glowing again. Not the bright blue light from earlier, this was softer, like starlight scattered through the depths. I waded to the deepest pool, where Dr. Chen had photographed the structures. Up close, I could see what looked like an entrance carved into the underwater cliff face. Smooth stone that definitely wasn't natural, with symbols etched around the opening that hurt to look at directly. I took a deep breath, turned on my waterproof flashlight, and dove. The water was colder than ice, but I didn't feel the shock I expected. Instead, there was a strange tingling sensation, like the water was charged with electricity. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing a tunnel that led straight into the limestone cliff. I swam hard, my lungs burning as I followed the tunnel deeper and deeper. Just when I thought I'd have to turn back, I saw light ahead. I surfaced in an underwater cave that glowed with its own soft radiance. The cavern was huge, bigger than a cathedral. The walls were covered with crystals that pulsed with gentle light, creating patterns that shifted and changed like living things. The air smelled like rain and ozone and something else I couldn't identify. And everywhere, carved into the crystal walls, were images, pictures that told a story spanning thousands of years. I saw the moon-eyed people in their prime, a civilization of pale, beautiful beings who lived in harmony with the earth. They had built cities of crystal and light, deep beneath the mountains. They had learned to bend space and time, to speak with the spirits of water and stone. But then humans came. Not just Cherokee. Earlier peoples, carrying iron weapons and fire. The moon-eyed people tried to hide deeper underground, but their numbers dwindled. They became legend, then myth, then forgotten entirely. All but a few. "You came," a familiar voice said behind me. I turned to see Amy Henderson standing at the edge of the crystal pool. She looked exactly like herself, except for those silver eyes and the way she seemed to glow from within. "I had to," I said. "Your parents think you're dead." "I was dead," Amy said matter-of-factly. "Not my body, but my spirit. Up there, everything was so small and gray. Down here, I can see colors that don't have names. I can hear the music that stones make when they grow." Marcus and Sarah appeared beside her, their faces bright with an otherworldly joy I'd never seen in any child above ground. "It's not like being human," Marcus explained. "It's better. We don't get tired or hungry or sad. And the games," he gestured toward the crystal walls, which began showing moving images like a three-dimensional movie. "We can play inside stories. We can race with time itself." "But what about your families?" I asked. "They love you. They need you." Sarah's silver eyes grew sad for a moment. "We love them too. But love doesn't mean staying in a place that makes you small." As she spoke, more moon-eyed people emerged from passages I hadn't noticed. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Adults and children, all pale and glowing, all watching me with those impossible silver eyes. One figure stepped forward, taller than the others, ancient in a way that had nothing to do with physical age. "Rebecca Silverbrook," it said in a voice like wind through crystal caves. "You have come to take our new children from us." "I've come to understand," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "These children's families are grieving. They deserve to know their kids are alive." "Are they alive?" the figure asked. "Or have they become something beyond your limited understanding of life?" It gestured to the crystal walls, which now showed images of the 3 missing children playing impossible games with moon-eyed children. They were laughing, dancing through walls of solid stone, painting with light itself. "We are the last," the figure continued. "The last of our kind. For centuries, we have lived alone in the deep places, watching our crystal cities crumble, our stories fade from memory. These 3 children are the first new life we have welcomed in generations." "You're stealing them," I said. "We are saving them," the figure replied. "From a world that would teach them to fear wonder, to forget magic, to accept gray lives in gray places." I looked at Amy, Marcus, and Sarah. They were still the children I'd known, but there was something in their faces that hadn't been there before. A depth, a knowing, a contentment that seemed impossible for kids their age. "What if their parents could see this place?" I asked. "What if they could understand what you're offering?" The figure's silver eyes widened slightly. "You would bring more humans here? To our sacred spaces? Just the parents. Just so they can see their children are safe and happy. So they can say goodbye properly, if that's what the kids choose." The moon-eyed people began murmuring to each other in their musical language. The crystal walls flickered with new images. The children's parents, crying and searching, holding on to hope that was slowly dying. Finally, the figure nodded. 3 days, it said. We will allow the parents to visit our realm for 3 days, but there are conditions. What conditions? They must come alone, with only what they can carry. They must promise to keep our existence secret from the outside world, and they must accept whatever choice their children make. I thought about Tom and Helen Henderson, about the Pratts and Williamses. Could they handle seeing their children transformed into something beyond human understanding? Could they let them go if that's what the kids truly wanted? I'll ask them, I said. And you, Rebecca Silverbrook? The figure stepped closer, and I could feel energy radiating from its pale skin. What will you choose? You have seen wonders beyond human imagination. You have walked in places where time moves differently. Will you return to your gray world above? For a moment, I was tempted. The crystal caverns were beautiful beyond description. The moon-eyed people's children laughed with pure joy. There was magic here that could fill the empty places in my heart. But then I thought about all the other children up above, the ones who would go missing in years to come, the families who would grieve without understanding. I'll stay above, I said. Someone needs to be a bridge between your world and mine. Someone needs to make sure both sides understand each other. The figure nodded approvingly. Wisdom. Yes, we will need such a bridge. Very well, Rebecca Silverbrook. Bring the parents. Let them see their children's joy, and let them choose whether love means holding on or letting go. 3 days later, I led 6 terrified, hopeful parents down into the crystal caves beneath Blind Creek. Tom and Helen Henderson held hands so tightly their knuckles were white. The Pratts whispered prayers under their breath. Mary Williams kept touching the pocket where she carried Sarah's favorite stuffed animal. They had all agreed to the conditions, though I could see the fear in their eyes, fear that their children really were lost forever, fear that they might be walking into a trap, fear that they'd have to make an impossible choice. The moon-eyed people were waiting for us in the great crystal chamber. They had prepared what could only be called a feast, fruits that glowed from within, water that tasted like starlight, bread that seemed to be made from crystallized air. And the children, Amy, Marcus, and Sarah, came running to their parents with joy and love that was absolutely genuine. But the parents could see what I had seen. Their kids were different now. Pale and glowing, with silver eyes that held depths of knowledge no human child should possess. Mommy, Daddy, Amy threw herself into her parents' arms. I missed you so much. But wait until you see what I can do now. She stepped back and began to dance, and as she moved, trails of light followed her hands. She painted pictures in the air, butterflies made of starlight, flowers that bloomed in 3 dimensions, a tiny horse that galloped through space before dissolving into sparkles. Marcus showed his parents how he could walk through solid stone, his body becoming translucent as he passed through the crystal walls. Sarah demonstrated how she could speak with the ancient spirits that lived in the caves, carrying on conversations with beings made of pure light. It doesn't hurt, Sarah assured her mother, who was crying as she watched. It feels like being more myself than I ever was before. The moon-eyed people explained everything. How the children had heard their call in dreams, how they had come willingly, drawn by a connection that went deeper than mere curiosity. How they had been transformed, not by force, but by choice. Their human nature expanded rather than replaced. They are still your children, the ancient figure assured the parents. They still love you. But they have become something more than human, something that can exist in both worlds if they choose. For 3 days, the parents stayed in the crystal caves. They played impossible games with their transformed children. They listened to music that was older than humanity. They saw wonders that couldn't exist in the rational world above. And slowly, painfully, they came to understand what their children had become. On the final day, there was a ceremony. The moon-eyed people gathered in the great chamber, their bodies glowing like living stars. The children stood between their human parents and their new crystalline family. You must choose now, the ancient figure said gently. Will you return to the world above, or will you stay with us in the deep places? Amy looked at her parents, then at the magical realm around her. Can I do both? Can I visit you sometimes and stay here sometimes? The ancient figure smiled. The first time I'd seen such an expression on any moon-eyed face. Yes, it said. That is wisdom. You are bridges now, like Rebecca Silverbrook. You belong to both worlds. So that's how it ended. Not with rescue or tragedy, but with transformation. Amy, Marcus, and Sarah return to the surface world regularly. They go to school, play with friends, help their parents with chores. But they're different now. Calmer, more aware. Sometimes their eyes flash silver in dim light, and they know things they couldn't possibly know. And once a month, during the new moon, they return to the crystal caves beneath Blind Creek. They play games with time and light. They learn the ancient songs. They help preserve a civilization that was almost lost forever. The official report lists them as found after 3 days, suffering from mild exposure and dehydration. The strange stone formations in the creek were attributed to unusual geological activity. The equipment failures were blamed on magnetic anomalies in the limestone bedrock. Only 6 parents, 1 Cherokee cultural consultant, 1 sheriff, and 1 park ranger know the truth. I still work these mountains, still help find missing children, but now I know there are different kinds of lost and different kinds of found. Sometimes, late at night when I'm patrolling the valleys, I see lights moving beneath other creeks, hear singing in languages that predate human civilization. The moon-eyed people are waking up from their long sleep, reaching out to the world above. And sometimes children hear their call. When it happens, and it does happen, maybe once or twice a year, I'm there to help the families understand, to serve as a bridge between the possible and the impossible, to make sure that love means allowing transformation, not preventing it. The mountains keep their secrets well, but they're not empty secrets anymore. They're full of wonder and children's laughter, and light that flows like water through crystal caves where time moves differently, where the moon-eyed people wait patiently for their next playmates, and where I stand guard, making sure both worlds stay safe. My name is Daniel Stormhaven, and in 21 years of mountain rescue work, I thought I'd seen everything the wilderness could throw at a man. I've pulled broken bodies from cliff faces, talked jumpers down from ledges, and held dying hands until the helicopters arrived. I've learned that mountains don't care about your plans, your family, or your faith. They just are. But nothing in my training prepared me for what happened at Sorrow's Gorge in the spring of 1979. The gorge sits deep in the Monongahela National Forest, a slash in the earth so narrow that sunlight only reaches the bottom for 3 hours each day. The river that carved it still runs wild, fed by snowmelt and spring rains. Local folks avoid the place, have for generations. They say it's cursed. I always figured that was just mountain talk, the kind of stories that grow up around dangerous places to keep fools from getting themselves killed. I should have listened. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. 3 separate hikers had reported hearing someone crying for help from deep in the gorge. The strange thing was, they all heard it from different spots along the rim, miles apart. Sarah Martinez, the park dispatcher, looked puzzled when she handed me the reports. "Dan, these don't make sense," she said, pushing her glasses up her nose. "Listen to this. The first hiker heard the calls at 6 a.m. from the north rim. The second one heard them at 6:15 from the south side. The third heard them at 6:30 from the east overlook. No way someone could move that fast through that terrain." I studied the topographic maps spread across my desk. Sorrow's Gorge was a spiderweb of cliffs and loose rock. The bottom was 3 miles down by the safest route, and there was no way out except the way you came in. If someone was trapped down there, they'd been calling for help from 1 spot, not 3. "Maybe it's the acoustics," I said, though I didn't believe it myself. "Sound bounces weird in those rock formations." Sarah shook her head. All 3 hikers said it sounded like a woman, young woman, crying like her heart was broken. Something cold touched my spine. My wife, Emma, had been a young woman when she fell. The memory hit me like it always did, sudden and sharp. Her hand slipping from mine on Cathedral Rock, her scream cutting off too quick, the awful silence that followed. "I'll check it out," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. The drive to the trailhead took 40 minutes on winding mountain roads. The spring air was crisp, full of the smell of new growth and melting snow. Birds sang in the trees, and everything felt normal, peaceful, even. It wasn't until I reached the North Rim overlook that things started to feel wrong. The silence hit me first, not the good kind of quiet you get in the mountains, but something deeper, unnatural. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I stood at the edge and looked down into the gorge. The walls dropped away in layers of gray stone and shadow. Far below, I could see the white foam of rapids. "Hello," I called out. "This is Park Ranger Stormhaven. Can anyone hear me?" My voice echoed back strange. Not the clean bounce you'd expect, but something twisted, like the rocks were changing my words as they passed them along. I waited, listened. That's when I heard it. Soft at first, almost lost in the sound of rushing water. A woman crying. Not the sharp cry of someone in pain, but the deep, broken sobbing of someone who'd lost everything. The sound made my chest tight. It reminded me too much of the months after Emma died, when I'd wake up at night to find myself weeping into her empty pillow. "Ma'am," I shouted, "I'm here to help. Where are you?" The crying stopped. The silence that followed felt like something watching me. I moved to the south overlook, then the east one. At each spot, I heard the same thing. That heartbroken sobbing coming from somewhere impossible to reach. But there was something else now. Something that made my hands shake as I gripped my radio. The crying sounded familiar. I radioed for backup and started down the main trail into the gorge. The path was steep and treacherous, carved into the cliff face by the Civilian Conservation Corps back in the 1930s. Spring runoff had washed out sections, leaving gaps I had to jump. My boots slipped on wet stone more than once. The deeper I went, the colder it got. That made sense. Sunlight barely reached the bottom, but this felt different. Like the cold was coming from inside the rocks themselves. Halfway down, I found the first sign that something was very wrong. A child's doll sat on a ledge beside the trail. It was old, the kind made of composition and cloth, probably from the 1940s or 1950s. Its dress was faded pink, and one glass eye was missing. Someone had placed a circle of smooth river stones around it, like a tiny grave marker. I keyed my radio. "Base, this is Stormhaven. I'm finding some unusual items on the trail. Looks like someone's been leaving memorials." Static crackled back at me. Then Sarah's voice, distorted and strange. "Dan, can't. Signal breaking. Be careful." The radio went dead. I continued down and found more items. A teddy bear from the 1960s, arranged with wildflowers that couldn't possibly grow in these shadows. A woman's wedding ring, placed carefully on a flat stone with a handful of dried roses. A baby's booty, so small it could have fit in my palm. All of them arranged like shrine offerings. All of them decades old, from different time periods. But the strangest thing was how fresh they looked. The flowers weren't wilted. The teddy bear's fur was clean and soft. Even the doll's dress looked like it had been carefully tended. The trail switched back one final time, and I reached the gorge bottom. The river ran fast and angry, swollen with snowmelt. Boulders, the size of houses, had fallen from the cliffs above, creating a maze of stone and shadow. The sound of water was so loud I had to strain to hear anything else. That's when I saw her. At first, I thought it was just mist rising from the rapids. The air was full of spray, and the light was dim and gray. But then the mist moved wrong. Not drifting with the wind, but walking. Walking like a person. She was maybe 100 yards away, on the far side of the river where no trail existed. A woman in a long white dress, picking her way carefully over the rocks. Her hair hung loose and wet around her shoulders. She moved like she was searching for something, bending down to look behind boulders, calling out in a voice I couldn't quite hear over the water. "Ma'am," I shouted, "stay where you are. I'm coming to help." She looked up at my voice, and even across the distance, I could see her face was streaked with tears. She raised one hand toward me, whether in greeting or warning, I couldn't tell. Then she stepped behind a boulder and vanished. I found a place where the river narrowed and jumped across, landing hard on the slick rocks. My ankle twisted, but I pushed through the pain. When I reached the spot where I'd seen her, there was nothing. No footprints in the sand between stones. No sign anyone had been there. But I could smell something. Roses. Old roses, the kind Emma used to grow in our garden. The scent was so strong it made my eyes water. Emma? The name slipped out before I could stop it. The crying started again. Closer now. So close, I spun around, expecting to see someone right behind me. But there was only the river and the stones and the gray walls rising up on all sides. Then I heard my name. "Daniel, Daniel, help me." The voice was soft, lost, heartbroken. and it sounded exactly like my wife. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely work my equipment. I pulled out my emergency whistle and blew 3 sharp blasts, the signal for found victim, need assistance. The sound echoed off the gorge walls, but when it came back, it sounded like screaming. I tried the radio again. Nothing but static, and what might have been whispers. That's when I noticed the rope. My climbing rope, the one I'd secured to a tree at the top of the gorge, hung down the cliff face, like always. But someone, or something, had tied knots in it. Not random knots, but specific ones. The kind you use to make a noose. 7 of them, evenly spaced down the length of the rope. I ran for the trail, my injured ankle sending spikes of pain up my leg with every step. But I'd only gone a few yards when I heard it again. "My name," called in Emma's voice, coming from deeper in the gorge. "Daniel, don't leave me. Please don't leave me again." I stopped running. Because the last thing Emma had said to me, as her fingers slipped from mine on Cathedral Rock, was exactly those words, "Please don't leave me again." Only, I had never told anyone that. Not the investigators, not the counselor, not even Emma's sister. It was just between Emma and me, in that terrible moment when I couldn't hold on tight enough to save her. So how could anyone else know? I spent the night in the gorge. I know that sounds crazy, but I couldn't leave. Not when someone who sounded like Emma was calling for help. I'd failed to save her once. I couldn't do it again, even if this was impossible. I set up camp on a flat area near the river, using my emergency gear. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped fast. My breath came out in puffs, and ice started forming on the rocks near the water. But the cold wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the sounds. As soon as the sun disappeared behind the gorge rim, the crying started again. Not just one voice now, but many. Women, children, even men. All of them sobbing like their hearts were broken. The sounds came from everywhere. The cliffs above, the water below, the spaces between the boulders. Sometimes they were so close I could have reached out and touched whoever was making them. But when I turned my flashlight toward the sounds, there was never anyone there. Around midnight, I heard footsteps. Slow, careful steps picking their way over the rocks. I grabbed my light and swept it across the gorge. Nothing. But the footsteps kept coming, getting closer. "Who's there?" I called out. "I'm a park ranger. I can help you." The footsteps stopped. The crying stopped. Even the river seemed to quiet down, like everything was listening. Then a voice spoke from right behind me. "You couldn't help me." I spun around, my heart hammering. The woman in white stood 5 feet away, close enough that my light should have lit her up clear as day. But she looked wrong. Faded, like an old photograph. Her dress was soaking wet, and her hair hung in dark strings around a face that was too pale, too thin. And her eyes were holes, dark, empty spaces where eyes should be. "You let me fall," she said, and it was Emma's voice coming from that terrible face. "You promised you'd never let me go, and you let me fall." "Emma, I'm sorry," I whispered. I tried to hold on. I tried so hard. She tilted her head like she was listening to something I couldn't hear. "He says he tried. He says he's sorry." Her voice was changing, becoming something else, older, angrier. "They all say that. All the ones who couldn't save us." That's when I realized this wasn't Emma. This was something wearing her voice like a mask. "Who are you?" I managed. She smiled, and it was the most awful thing I'd ever seen. "I am sorrow, Daniel. I am the grief that never ends. I am what's left when love fails." She pointed to the memorial items I'd found on the trail. Sarah Chen, age 8. Fell from the North Rim in 1953 while picking flowers for her mother. Tommy Rodriguez, age 16. Tried to climb down to rescue his girlfriend in 1961. Both of them died when the rope broke. Margaret Webb, age 24. Jumped from the East Overlook in 1973 after her baby died. With each name, more figures appeared around us. Pale, faded people in clothes from different decades, all of them weeping, all of them staring at me with those empty, hungry eyes. 47 deaths, the thing wearing Emma's voice continued. 47 souls who died with broken hearts. And I've been here for them all, Daniel. Singing their sorrow, keeping their pain alive. I understood now. This wasn't about rescue, it was about collection. "You want me to join them?" I said. "You already have," She gestured to the noose knots in my rope. As soon as you heard your wife calling, you started dying. That's how grief works, Daniel. It kills you one breath at a time. The other figures moved closer. I could hear them whispering now, telling me their stories, how they'd lost children, lovers, parents, how the pain had driven them to the gorge, how they'd found peace in the woman's eternal mourning. Just let go, Emma's voice said gently. Let the rope slip again. This time, fall with me. I looked at my hands and realized I was holding my climbing rope, the one with the noose knots. I was standing at the edge of a cliff I didn't remember climbing, looking down into darkness. And part of me wanted to jump, the part that had been dying since the day Emma fell. The part that woke up every morning wondering why I'd survived when she hadn't. The part that heard her calling my name in every wind, saw her face in every shadow. That's right, the woman whispered. Join us. Be with her forever. I took a step forward. The rope felt good in my hands. Natural. Like it had always been meant to end this way. But something stopped me. A memory. Not of Emma dying, but of Emma living. Her laugh when I'd proposed with a ring hidden in a hiking granola bar. The way she'd bandage my cuts and scrapes after difficult rescues. The night she'd told me that loving someone meant helping them heal, not keeping their wounds open. Emma wouldn't want this, I said. The thing in white hissed. You don't know what she wants. You weren't there when she needed you. No, I said, letting the rope fall. But I know what she'd tell me to do. I pulled out my radio and switched it to the emergency frequency. Static filled the air, but underneath it, I could hear something else. Sarah's voice, calling my name from very far away. The woman shrieked and lunged for me. Her fingers passed right through my chest, but where they touched, ice spread under my skin. The other figures moved in, reaching for me with grasping hands. Base, this is Stormhaven, I said into the radio, fighting to keep my voice steady. I need immediate evacuation from Sorrow's Gorge, and I need you to contact the West Virginia Historical Society. I need everything they have on deaths in this location, going back 200 years. The woman's scream grew louder, more desperate. The sound of it cracked rocks, started small avalanches on the cliff faces. You can't leave, she wailed. No one leaves. Everyone who comes here stays. Everyone who grieves stays. Not everyone, I said. Not anymore. The helicopter couldn't reach me until dawn. I spent the rest of the night dodging the spirits that tried to drag me over the cliff. Every time I closed my eyes, they showed me Emma falling. Every time I tried to rest, they whispered about all the ways I'd failed her. But I held on to what I'd remembered. Emma's voice, her real voice, telling me that love meant helping people heal. When the rescue chopper finally lowered a basket into the gorge, the woman in white stood watching from across the river. She wasn't screaming anymore, just crying. The deep, hopeless sobs I'd heard from the first day. Daniel, she called as the winch pulled me up. Don't forget us. Promise you won't forget. I looked down at her one last time. In the morning light, she looked smaller, younger. Not terrifying, just infinitely sad. I won't forget, I called back. But I didn't promise to stay. Back at park headquarters, I spent 3 days going through historical records with Dr. Patricia Wynn from the State Historical Society. What we found explained everything. In 1823, a woman named Mercy Blackwood had lived in a cabin near what was now called Sorrow's Gorge. She'd lost her husband in a logging accident, then watched her 2 young children die of fever during a harsh winter. Driven mad by grief, she'd wandered the gorge calling for them until she fell from the cliffs. But according to local legends, her spirit never left. For 200 years, she'd been collecting other grieving souls, trying to build the family she'd lost. Every person who died in the gorge had come there because of some terrible loss, and somehow she'd called to them, drawn them in with the promise that their pain would be understood. She's not evil, Dr. Wynn explained. She's just a mother who can't let go. That gave me an idea. On Saturday morning, I went back to the gorge. This time, I brought backup. 3 other rangers and Dr. Wynn, who specialized in historical trauma counseling. We also brought something else. Flowers. 47 white roses, 1 for each person who died. The woman appeared as soon as we reached the bottom. She looked wary, frightened. The other spirits hung back in the shadows, watching. You came back, she said. Why? Because you asked me not to forget. I held out the roses. These are for your children, Mercy. And for everyone else you've been caring for." She stared at the flowers like she'd never seen anything so beautiful. You know my name? Mercy Blackwood. You lost Thomas and little Sarah in the winter of 1823. You loved them so much you couldn't let them go." She began to cry again, but softer now. Human tears instead of the endless wailing. "I just wanted them back," she whispered. "I just wanted my babies back." "I know, but Mercy, they're not here. They never were. The people who died in this place, you were trying to make them into your family, but they had families of their own." Dr. Wynne stepped forward. "Mercy, I know about loss. I know what it's like to feel like you can't go on. But keeping others trapped in grief doesn't heal your pain, it only spreads it. But if I let them go," Mercy looked around at the spirits watching us, "if I let them go, I'll be alone. I've been alone for so long." "You don't have to be alone," I said. "Your children are waiting for you, Mercy, not here, but somewhere else. Somewhere you can only go if you let go of this place." I thought of Emma, of the dreams I'd had where she was happy and whole and free of the pain that had marked her last moments. I thought of the choice between keeping someone's ghost trapped with my grief or letting them find peace. "Will you help me?" Mercy asked. "Help me say goodbye?" We held a ceremony there at the bottom of the gorge. Dr. Wynne said words about release and peace. The other rangers stood respectfully as I placed the 47 roses on the memorial items Mercy had collected over the years. As each rose was laid down, one of the spirits faded away. Not disappearing, but transforming, becoming something lighter, something free. Mercy was the last to go. She stood by the water's edge, looking young again. Looking like the mother she'd been before tragedy broke her heart. "Thank you," she said, "for seeing me. For helping me remember that love isn't about holding on, it's about letting go." Then she was gone too, not vanishing but becoming part of the morning light on the water. The gorge felt different after that. Still beautiful, still dangerous, but not haunted. The silence was natural now, peaceful. That was 6 months ago. Since then, there haven't been any reports of crying voices from Sorrow's Gorge. The Park Service has installed new safety barriers and warning signs, but mostly, people just don't feel compelled to go there anymore. The pull that drew grieving souls to the cliffs is gone. I still work mountain rescue, still save who I can, mourn who I can't. But something changed in me during those days in the gorge. I learned the difference between honoring grief and being consumed by it. I started a support group for people who've lost loved ones in wilderness accidents. We meet once a week at the ranger station, and we talk about the hard work of healing. Dr. Wynne helps when she can. We call it the Mercy Group, after a woman who finally learned to let go. I still miss Emma. I always will. But now when I hear her voice in the wind, it's not calling for help. It's telling me to keep living, keep helping, keep loving the world she had to leave behind. Sometimes, late at night, I drive up to the overlook above Sorrow's Gorge. I sit there in my truck and listen to the water running far below. It's just water now. Just a river carving its way through stone, the way rivers do. But I keep the radio on, tuned to the emergency frequency. Because there are other places in these mountains, other spots where sorrow has taken root and grown into something hungry. And sometimes, just sometimes, I hear calls for help that sound a little too much like voices from beyond the grave. When that happens, I remember what Mercy taught me. Love isn't about holding on to what you've lost. It's about helping others find their way to peace, even if they've been dead for 200 years. My name is Daniel Stormhaven, and I've learned that some rescues take more than ropes and helicopters. Sometimes, the most important thing you can save is a soul that's forgotten how to let go. And sometimes, that soul is your own. My name is Catherine Nightwhisper, and I've been a park ranger for 13 years. That might sound like a made-up name, but it's real. My grandmother was Greek, and she had a thing for dramatic names. Most folks just call me Kate. I work the night shift at George Washington National Forest in Virginia. Specifically, I watch over Devil's Knob Summit, which sits about 40 miles from the nearest streetlight. It's my job to protect what we call a dark sky preserve, a place where the night stays truly dark so people can see the stars the way our ancestors did. The summit isn't easy to reach. You have to hike 3 miles up a rocky trail that'll test your ankles and your lungs. Most visitors come during the day, but I'm up there when the sun goes down. That's when the real magic happens, when you can see the Milky Way stretched across the sky like spilled milk on black cloth. I've always loved the night. Even as a kid, I'd sneak out to watch meteor showers and lunar eclipses. My mom used to joke that I was part bat. When I found this job, it felt like winning the lottery. Getting paid to protect darkness and watch the stars? Perfect. The summit has something special. An old stone circle that nobody really understands. The rocks are arranged in a perfect ring about 20 feet across. Some say Native Americans built it hundreds of years ago for ceremonies. Others think it's just a natural formation that looks organized. I've always figured it doesn't matter who made it. What matters is that it's been here longer than any of us. On clear nights, I set up my telescope inside the circle. My Celestron has been with me for 8 years, and I know every screw and lens by heart. I also carry night vision monoculars, military-grade stuff that turns the darkest night into green-tinted daylight. The Forest Service issued them after too many hikers got lost after sunset. October 21st, 1981, was supposed to be routine. The autumn equinox meant perfect viewing conditions, and the new moon promised complete darkness. I had my gear ready, my thermos filled with coffee, and a group of amateur astronomers coming up around midnight to watch for meteors. But something felt different that night from the moment I reached the summit. The forest was too quiet. Usually, you hear owls calling, leaves rustling, maybe a fox moving through the underbrush. That night, nothing. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I've spent enough nights alone in the woods to know when things feel wrong, and this felt very wrong. I set up my telescope anyway. Work is work, and I had astronomers counting on me to provide them with a safe, dark viewing spot. But as I adjusted the eyepiece, I noticed something odd in my peripheral vision. My shadow looked wrong. I was standing next to my telescope with a small red flashlight in my hand. The light cast a clear shadow of me onto the ground behind me, but for just a second, I could have sworn my shadow moved before I did, like it was leading instead of following. I turned around quickly, shining my flashlight on the ground. Nothing there but pine needles and granite. I laughed at myself. 13 years of night work can play tricks on your eyes, especially when you're tired, but the feeling wouldn't go away. The darkness around the stone circle seemed thicker than normal, more solid. When I looked through my telescope at Jupiter, the planet appeared dimmer than it should have been, like something was filtering the light. I checked my watch. 11:47 p.m. The astronomers would arrive soon, and I needed to shake off these silly feelings. I'm supposed to be the professional here, the expert who keeps people safe in the dark. I walked over to the largest stone in the circle to lean against it while I waited. The granite felt unusually cold, even for October. As I pressed my back against it, I noticed something carved into the surface that I'd never seen before. It looked like human figures dancing, their arms raised to the sky. The carving was old, really old, but it seemed deeper and clearer than it should have been after years of weather and time. That's when I heard the first whisper. The whisper came from right behind me, but when I spun around, no one was there. It sounded like someone saying my name, but stretched out and hollow, like an echo in a deep cave. Catherine. I clicked on my flashlight and swept it across the stone circle. Nothing. Just empty space between the ancient rocks. But my hands were shaking as I held the light. "Hello?" I called out. "If someone's there, you need to identify yourself. This is a restricted area after dark." Silence answered me. The kind of silence that presses against your eardrums and makes you aware of your own heartbeat. I checked my radio to make sure it worked. The static crackled normally when I keyed the microphone. Base station was 20 miles away, but I could reach them if needed. That made me feel a little better. At 11:55, I heard voices coming up the trail. Real voices this time, talking about f-stops and exposure times. The astronomy group was arriving. There were 4 of them. Dr. Sarah Chen, a professor from Virginia Tech, her graduate student, Mark, and an older couple named the Hendersons who'd driven down from Maryland. I'd worked with Dr. Chen before. She was serious about her observations and always treated the summit with respect. "Beautiful night, Kate," Dr. Chen said as she set down her equipment bag. "Perfect conditions for the Orionids." Should be good viewing, I agreed, though I still felt uneasy. I've got the circle reserved for you until dawn. Just remember to keep your lights red filtered. As they set up their cameras and telescopes, I walked the perimeter of the summit, checking for any safety hazards. That's when I found the first set of footprints. They were human, definitely human, but wrong somehow. The prints were too shallow, like whoever made them barely touched the ground. And they didn't lead anywhere. They started near the stone circle and just ended, like someone had stepped down from the air, taken 3 steps, and vanished. I knelt down and examined them with my flashlight. The prints were clear in the soft dirt, showing the outline of bare feet. Not shoes or boots, actual skin touching earth. Who hikes 3 miles up a mountain at night without shoes? Kate, Dr. Chen's voice made me jump. Is everything all right? Just checking the area, I said, standing up. Found some unusual tracks. She walked over and looked where I was pointing. Probably from earlier today. People leave all kinds of traces. But I knew these were fresh. I'd done my usual sweep at sunset and hadn't seen them then. The astronomy group got to work, setting up their cameras to capture long exposures of the meteor shower. Mark was especially excited. This was his first time doing serious astrophotography. Dr. Chen, he said, look at this. Something's wrong with my camera. She moved to his tripod and looked at the camera's LCD screen. I could see it from where I stood. The image showed the stone circle clearly, but there were dark shapes moving around the edges that didn't match anything visible to our eyes. Must be a sensor problem, Dr. Chen said, but she sounded uncertain. Mrs. Henderson pointed at her husband's telescope. Harold, why is your finder scope showing shadows when there's nothing casting them? Harold adjusted his equipment and looked again. That's odd. The telescope shows clear sky, but the finder scope is picking up moving objects. I felt ice water in my veins. My equipment was showing the same impossible readings, but I hadn't wanted to alarm anyone. Everyone stay calm, I said, falling back on my training. Sometimes atmospheric conditions can cause optical illusions. But as I spoke, I watched my own shadow on the ground. It was moving wrong again, swaying slightly even though I was standing perfectly still, and it seemed darker than it should be, like it was made of something thicker than ordinary darkness. Mark suddenly grabbed Dr. Chen's arm. Professor, look at the stones. We all turned to look at the stone circle. For just a moment, I could have sworn I saw figures moving between the rocks, tall, thin shapes that flowed like water but held human form. They were dancing, turning in slow circles with their arms raised to the stars. Then my eyes focused properly, and there was nothing there. Did everyone see that? Mrs. Henderson whispered. See what? Her husband asked, but his voice shook. Dr. Chen was checking her equipment frantically. Our cameras recorded it, she said. Whatever it was, it's on film. I looked at the LCD screen on her camera. The image showed the stone circle bathed in moonlight, but there were definitely dark figures visible in the frame. Human-shaped shadows that seemed to dance around the ancient rocks. Everyone pack up, I said. Right now. But Kate, Dr. Chen started. Now, I said firmly. Something's not right here. As they gathered their equipment, I noticed that all our shadows had grown longer and darker, stretching toward the stone circle like they were being pulled by an invisible force. And in the center of the circle, where no person stood, a new shadow had appeared. It was dancing. Getting 4 scared astronomers down a dark mountain trail took longer than I'd hoped. By the time their car lights disappeared down the forest road, it was almost 2 a.m. I should have gone home too. Should have written up a report about equipment malfunctions and called it a night. Instead, I drove back up to the summit. I know it sounds crazy, but I needed to understand what had happened. In 13 years of night work, I'd never seen anything I couldn't explain with science or common sense. Whatever was going on up there, it was happening in my preserve, on my watch. The hike up felt different this time. My flashlight beam seemed weaker, like the darkness was pushing back against it. Twice, I stopped, certain I heard footsteps behind me, but when I turned around, the trail was empty. When I reached the summit, I understood why the astronomers' equipment had malfunctioned. The stone circle was full of shadows, human-shaped shadows moving in slow, deliberate patterns. But there were no people casting them. I counted 12 distinct figures. They flowed around the circle like dancers in some ancient ritual, their arms moving in gestures I somehow recognized but couldn't name. They made no sound, left no footprints, but they were definitely there. I tried to radio for backup, but my radio only produced static. I tried my cell phone, no signal, which was normal for the summit, but the screen wouldn't even light up. Something was interfering with all my electronics. That's when I noticed my own shadow. It had separated from my feet and was walking toward the stone circle. I was standing still, but my shadow moved independently, flowing across the ground to join the dance. I stepped backward, and my shadow kept going forward. For a moment, I felt a terrible pulling sensation, like something was trying to tear me in half. Then, the feeling stopped, and my shadow snapped back to where it belonged. But now I understood what I was looking at. These weren't just shadows, they were people. Or they used to be people. Somehow, some way, their shadows had been separated from their bodies and trapped here, forced to repeat some ancient ceremony forever. I pulled out my night vision monoculars and focused on the dancing figures. Through the green-tinted lenses, I could see them more clearly. They were Native Americans, dressed in traditional clothing that looked hundreds of years old. Their faces showed incredible sadness and longing. One of them noticed me watching and stopped dancing. The others continued their eternal movement, but this one shadow turned toward me and raised its hand. Not in greeting, in warning. I lowered the monoculars, and the figure was gone. But carved into the stone next to where it had been standing, new symbols had appeared. They looked like petroglyphs, showing a story in simple pictures. The first carving showed people dancing under the stars. The second showed a break in the circle, dancers falling. The third showed shadows continuing to dance while bodies lay still on the ground. And the fourth showed a new figure joining the dance, someone with a ranger's hat and long hair. Someone who looked like me. I turned to run, but stopped when I saw that the trail down the mountain was blocked. Shadow figures stood between the trees, not threatening, but unmistakably there. They weren't going to let me leave. My flashlight flickered and died. In the complete darkness, I could hear the whisper again, clearer this time. Help us finish what was begun. The voice came from directly in front of me, though I couldn't see who spoke. It sounded old and tired, like someone who'd been waiting centuries for help. Finish what? I asked aloud, feeling foolish for talking to the darkness. The ceremony, the dance of seasons. We began it 300 autumns ago, but the circle was broken before completion. We cannot rest. We cannot move on. We are trapped between the world of flesh and the world of spirit. As the voice spoke, my eyes adjusted enough to see the speaker, an elderly Native American man whose shadow body flickered like candlelight. Behind him, the other dancers had stopped their movement and were watching me. What do you need me to do? I asked. Complete the pattern, dance the final steps. But know this, if you join us, you may not be able to return to your world. The ceremony demands a price. I thought about my life, my job, my little apartment 20 miles away. It wasn't much, but it was mine. These shadow people had been trapped for 3 centuries, dancing the same steps over and over, unable to rest or move on. What if I refuse? Then we continue as we have, and you join us anyway when your time comes. But the ceremony remains unfinished, and we all stay trapped. I looked around at the faces of the shadow dancers. They weren't evil or threatening. They were just tired. So incredibly tired. But there had to be another way. There always was. Wait, I said, pulling out my astronomical charts. You said the ceremony was about seasons. The autumn equinox is about balance, right? Light and dark, sun and shadow? The elderly shadow nodded. What if we don't need a person to complete it? What if we need the right celestial timing? I spread my charts on the ground, using my dying flashlight to read them. The ceremony started 300 years ago. That would be 1681. But the calendar was different then. Julian calendar instead of Gregorian. The shadows gathered around me as I calculated. The autumn equinox you started your ceremony on in 1681 in our modern calendar, that would be. I checked my watch and my heart raced. Tonight, right now, the true autumn equinox from your original ceremony is happening in the next hour. The elderly shadow smiled. You understand. But the ceremony still requires a living person to anchor it to the physical world. Then I'll do it, I said. But we do it right. Complete the ceremony properly, the way it was meant to be finished. The shadow dancers arranged themselves in their original circle pattern. Through my night vision monoculars, I could see them more clearly now. 12 figures representing the 12 months of the year, each positioned to correspond with a specific constellation. The elderly shadow who'd spoken to me was the leader, the 13th dancer who stood in the center to conduct the ceremony. But for 300 years, that center position had been empty, keeping the ritual incomplete. "You must take my place," he explained as the others resumed their slow movement. "Stand in the center and mirror our movements. When the equinox moment arrives, when day and night are perfectly balanced, the ceremony will be complete." I walked into the center of the stone circle. Immediately, I felt a change. The air grew thick and heavy, like walking into deep water. My body felt lighter, and when I looked down, I could see through my own hands. "What's happening to me?" "You are becoming part of both worlds," the leader said, "physical and spiritual. This is the only way to bridge the gap between our realm and yours." The shadow dancers began to move faster, their ritual taking on urgency as the celestial moment approached. I tried to follow their movements, raising my arms when they did, turning when they turned. But something was wrong. Every movement pulled me further away from the physical world. I could feel my connection to my body weakening, like a rope slowly fraying. If this continued, I would become a shadow myself, trapped here forever. "You didn't tell me it would take my life," I said. "We told you there was a price," the leader replied sadly. "We have been alone so long, we perhaps did not explain clearly. To anchor the ceremony, you must give up your physical form." "No." I stopped dancing. "There has to be another way." The other shadows continued their movement, but they looked distressed now. The ceremony was falling apart again, just like it had 300 years ago. I pulled out my telescope, hands barely solid enough to grip it. What if we use celestial alignment instead of human sacrifice? Working frantically, I aimed the telescope at specific star positions, calculating angles and alignments. The ceremony wasn't just about dancing. It was about connecting earth and sky, marking the passage of seasons, celebrating the balance between light and dark. The stone circle, I realized. It's not just ceremonial. It's an astronomical instrument. Each stone was positioned to align with specific stars at specific times. The dancers' positions corresponded to constellation patterns. This whole site was designed to capture and focus celestial energy. "Help me," I called to the shadows. "We need to align the ceremony with the actual stellar positions." The shadow dancers moved to new positions, each one standing behind a stone that matched their constellation. As they did, the stones began to glow with soft silver light. Through my telescope, I could see the exact moment of equinox approaching, the point when the sun would be directly above the Earth's equator, making day and night equal length everywhere on the planet. "Now," I whispered. The shadows raised their arms to the sky in perfect synchronization. The stones blazed with starlight, and for one perfect moment, I felt connected to everything. The earth beneath my feet, the stars above my head, the endless cycle of seasons and time. The ceremony was complete. The shadow dancers began to fade, but peacefully now, like smoke dissipating in a gentle breeze. Their faces showed relief and gratitude, instead of the endless sadness I'd seen before. "Thank you," the leader said as his form grew transparent. "We can rest now." "Wait," I called. "What about the site? Should I report this? Should I tell people what happened?" "Protect this place," he said. "It is sacred, a bridge between worlds, but some knowledge is too dangerous to share." As the last shadow disappeared, I felt my own body becoming solid again. My hands regained their weight, my feet found firm purchase on the ground. I was alive, truly alive, for the first time in hours. But I was also changed. I could see things differently now. The way moonlight carried memories, how shadows held depth and meaning, the connections between earth and sky that most people never notice. My radio crackled to life. "Ranger Night Whisper, this is Base. Do you copy?" I keyed the microphone. "This is Night Whisper. All clear up here." "Roger that. You've been off radio for 4 hours. Everything okay?" 4 hours? It had felt like 20 minutes. But when I checked my watch, dawn was breaking over the mountains. "Everything's fine," I said. "Just had some equipment problems." As I packed up my telescope, I noticed one last thing. The ancient carvings on the stones had changed. Instead of showing trapped dancers, they now depicted a completed ceremony, with figures ascending peacefully into a star-filled sky. And at the center of the circle, a new carving had appeared. A woman with long hair and a ranger's hat, helping to guide lost souls home. 3 months later, I was still working the night shift at Devil's Knob Summit, but everything was different now. The site became an official archaeological preserve after I submitted a report about the pre-Columbian stone circle. I didn't mention the shadow dancers, just noted the astronomical alignments and recommended protection for the area. Within 6 weeks, access was restricted to daylight hours only for visitor safety. That suited me fine. Whatever power the place held was stronger at night, and some visitors might see things they weren't ready to understand. Dr. Chen came back once, asking about the photographs her team had taken. The images clearly showed human figures in the stone circle, but I explained them as a double exposure effect caused by unusual atmospheric conditions. She accepted the explanation, though I could tell she didn't quite believe it. The shadow dancers were gone, truly gone. I never saw them again. But on clear nights, when I walked through the circle, I could feel their gratitude like a warm breeze. They had found peace, and they'd left the site cleaner somehow, more balanced. Other changes came too. My night vision improved dramatically. I could see in almost complete darkness now without equipment. Sometimes I caught glimpses of other things, other places where the boundary between worlds wore thin, parks across the country where similar events had happened or might happen again. I started getting calls from other rangers about unexplained incidents, strange sightings, equipment malfunctions, places where the rules of ordinary reality seemed to bend. My supervisor began sending me to investigate these reports, though I never told him why I was so good at resolving unusual situations. Some secrets are too dangerous to share, and some responsibilities choose you instead of the other way around. On anniversary nights, the autumn equinox in particular, I still set up my telescope in the stone circle, not because I expect the dancers to return, but because someone should witness and remember. Someone should stand guard at the places where worlds meet. Last week, a family hiking the trail during the day found something interesting. Their 6-year-old daughter insisted she could see nice people dancing around the stones in broad daylight. When her parents looked, they saw nothing but empty space. But children see things adults miss, and sacred places remember everything. I'm still Catherine Night Whisper, and I still protect the dark skies over Devil's Knob Summit. But now I protect something else too. The delicate balance between the world we see and the world that watches us back. Some nights, when the stars are particularly bright and the air is perfectly still, I can hear something that might be wind through the trees or might be whispered thanks from spirits finally at rest. Either way, I listen, and I keep watch. Because 13 years of guarding the darkness taught me that the most important things happen when no one else is looking, and the most sacred responsibilities are the ones nobody else can see. My name is Catherine Night Whisper, and this is my story. But it's not the end of the story. It's just the beginning of understanding that some places are doorways, some nights are bridges, and some shadows hold the memory of ancient dances that connect earth to sky and past to present. The summit is quiet now, peaceful in a way it hadn't been for centuries. But peace doesn't mean empty. It means balanced. And balance means that somewhere in the darkness, good spirits watch over us all. My name is Thomas Cloudwalker, and I've been watching the sky for 19 years. People think being a park ranger is all about hiking trails and helping lost tourists. But up here on Whisper Mountain Ridge in Shenandoah, my real job is reading the weather. The mountains make their own rules when it comes to storms and fog, and someone has to keep track of it all. I got my start back in college, studying how air moves around these old hills, the way warm air crashes into cold, how valleys trap moisture, why some ridges stay clear while others disappear in clouds for days. It's like watching a slow-motion battle between invisible armies. My weather station sits right on the highest point of the ridge. Steel towers with spinning cups to measure wind, boxes full of instruments that tell me things like air pressure and humidity. Most days, I can predict what's coming hours before it hits. Thunderstorms building in the west, morning fog that'll burn off by noon, ice storms that'll shut down the mountain roads. The old-timers around here always talked about weather spirits, how the mist had a mind of its own, how some fogs were different from others. Mountain folklore, I figured, Just people trying to make sense of atmospheric pressure and temperature inversions they didn't understand. I should have listened to them. It was early spring of 1967 when everything changed. The kind of morning that makes you glad to work outdoors. Clear blue sky, temperature climbing towards 60, perfect hiking weather. I was checking my instruments when I heard voices on the trail below. A family from Richmond. Mom, dad, 2 kids, maybe 10 and 12 years old. They'd driven up early to beat the crowds, planning to hike the Whisper Ridge Loop Trail. 3 miles of easy walking, with some of the best views in the park. "Morning," the father called up to me. "Looks like a perfect day for it." I waved back. "Should be beautiful up there. Watch for that overlook about a mile in teen. You can see 3 states on a clear day like this." The kids were already pulling ahead, excited to get started. The mother was taking pictures of everything. The wildflowers just starting to bloom. Her husband checking his map. The kids posing by the trail sign. "We'll be back before lunch," she told me. "Thank you for keeping watch over our weather." I laughed. That's what they pay me for. I watched them head up the trail until the trees swallowed them up. Then I went back to my readings. Barometric pressure, steady. Wind from the southwest at 8 miles per hour. Visibility unlimited. Perfect hiking conditions. That's when I noticed something odd on my instruments. The humidity gauge was climbing. Not fast, but steady. In 20 minutes, it had jumped from 40% to 60%. The air pressure was dropping too, just a little, but enough to make me frown. I stepped outside and looked around. Still clear, still sunny. But there was something different about the light, like looking through glass that's almost too clean. Then I saw it. Down in the valley, maybe 2 miles away, a thin line of white was moving up the mountainside. Fog, thick as cotton, rolling uphill against the wind. In 19 years of watching weather in these mountains, I'd never seen fog move that way. It should have been flowing down the valleys, following the streams. Instead, it was climbing straight up the ridges like it knew exactly where it wanted to go. I grabbed my radio. "Shenandoah dispatch, this is Cloudwalker on Whisper Ridge. I've got unexpected fog formation moving in from the south. Visibility's going to drop fast up here." "Copy that, Thomas. Any hikers on your trails?" I thought about the family from Richmond. The loop trail would take them right through the path of that fog. "Affirmative. Family of 4. Started up the ridge trail about an hour ago. We'll try to reach them by radio. Can you estimate time to your location?" I watched the white wall creep higher. It was moving faster now, and there was something wrong with the way it looked. Too thick. Too purposeful. "Maybe 30 minutes, I said. "But dispatch? This doesn't look like normal fog." The radio crackled. "What do you mean, Thomas?" I stared at the advancing wall of white. How could I explain that it looked almost solid, that it seemed to be choosing which paths to follow? "Just keep trying to reach those hikers," I said. 20 minutes later, the fog hit my station. The first thing you notice when that kind of fog rolls over you is the silence. Normal fog muffles sound, sure, but this was different. It didn't just muffle, it swallowed everything whole. My footsteps, my breathing, even the wind through the trees. Gone. I couldn't see my own hand when I held it 3 feet from my face. The fog was so thick it felt like walking through wet cotton. Every breath tasted of metal and something else, something sweet and strange that made my stomach turn. My weather instruments went crazy. The thermometer showed the temperature dropping 20 degrees in 5 minutes. The wind gauge spun wildly, then stopped completely. The barometric pressure needle bounced back and forth like a pinball. I tried my radio. Static. Even the emergency channel was dead. That's when I heard the voices. At first, I thought it was the family from Richmond. Faint calls for help somewhere out in the white. I grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the sound, following the trail I'd walked 1,000 times. "Hello," I called out. "Can you hear me? Follow my voice." The calls came back, closer now. But something was wrong with them. They echoed strangely, like voices bouncing around inside a cave. And they seemed to be coming from above me, not ahead on the trail. I stopped walking and listened hard. The voices came again, definitely calling for help. But now I could make out words, and my blood went cold. "Help us. We can't find. The trail is gone." It was the father's voice from that morning. But it sounded flat, empty, like someone reading from a script. Then the mother, "Thomas, Thomas, where are you? We can't see anything." How did they know my name? I'd told them I was a weather observer, but I'd never mentioned my name. And they'd been hiking for over an hour when the fog hit. They should be miles away, not right here at my station. The children's voices joined in. Help us, mister. We're scared. We can't find our mom and dad. But the kids were with their parents. I'd seen them all together on the trail. Something brushed against my arm. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the fog. Nothing there. But the touch had felt like fingers, cold and damp, trailing across my jacket. Who's there? I called out. The voices stopped. Complete silence again, so thick I could hear my own heartbeat. Then, from right behind me, a whisper. Thomas. I turned, sweeping the flashlight in a wide arc. The beam barely penetrated 5 feet before the fog swallowed it up. But in that circle of light, I saw something that made me stumble backward. Footprints in the dirt, fresh ones, leading in a perfect circle around where I was standing. Human footprints, but wrong somehow. Too deep, like whoever made them was much heavier than they should be. And they were filled with that same thick fog, glowing faintly in my flashlight beam. I followed the circle with my light. 15 feet across, with me right in the center, the prints went all the way around, then just stopped, like whoever made them had simply vanished into the air. That's when I ran. I knew these trails better than anyone, but the fog changed everything. Paths I could walk, blindfolded, seemed to twist and turn in impossible directions. My flashlight showed trees where I knew there should be clearings, rocks where I remembered streams. The voices followed me, always just out of sight, calling my name, asking for help. But now there were more of them. Dozens of voices, all crying out in that same flat, empty tone. I stumbled into a tree, bounced off, kept running. My lungs burned from breathing the thick, sweet air. The metal taste was stronger now, coating my tongue like copper pennies. Finally, I saw a light ahead. My weather station, the red warning beacon on top of the radio tower, cutting through the fog like a lighthouse. I burst through the door and slammed it behind me, hands shaking as I turned the locks. Through the windows, the fog pressed against the glass like water, swirling in patterns that looked almost like faces. I grabbed my emergency radio and tried every channel, nothing but static. Even the weather service frequency was dead. Then I looked at my logbook, where I recorded observations every hour. My handwriting, clear as day. But I didn't remember writing it. 2:15 p.m., visitors arrived. Weather spirits, very hungry today. Fed them well. They want to know more about the warm bloods who walk above the clouds. I stared at the page. I'd been unconscious in that fog for over 3 hours. Outside, the voices started again. But now I recognized all of them. Hikers who'd gone missing over the years. Campers who'd never made it home. People I'd helped search for, whose bodies we'd never found. They all knew my name. And they were all asking me to come outside and join them. I stayed locked in that weather station for 6 hours. The fog never lifted, never thinned. If anything, it got thicker as the sun went down. My instruments had given up trying to make sense of what was happening. The humidity gauge was pegged at 100%, but the temperature kept dropping. By sunset, it read 38 degrees outside. Fog doesn't act like that. Not natural fog. The voices never stopped either. They took turns calling to me, telling me their stories. A hiker from 1962 who'd gotten lost in an early snow. A couple from Pennsylvania who'd been camping when a sudden storm hit. Children who'd wandered off marked trails and never found their way back. All of them gone missing on days when unexpected weather had rolled in. All of them trying to convince me to open the door. Thomas, you understand weather better than anyone, said a woman's voice I recognized from 5 years ago. Sarah Martinez, a college student who'd been day hiking alone. We'd searched for 3 weeks. You know this isn't normal. You know what it really is. It's not trying to hurt us, said another voice, male, older, with a slight accent. It's trying to understand us, but it needs us to help. I pressed my face against the window, trying to see through the swirling white. Sometimes, just for a second, I thought I could make out shapes moving in the fog. Human-shaped, but wrong somehow. Too tall, or bending in ways people don't bend. What do you want? I called out. The voices stopped, complete silence for maybe 30 seconds. Then, all together, they spoke in perfect unison. To know what it feels like to be warm. The temperature gauge dropped another 5 degrees. That's when I understood. The fog wasn't just weather. It was alive, and it was cold. So cold that warmth was something it had never experienced. So it took warm things, animals, people, anything with body heat, and tried to understand what that felt like. But understanding meant absorbing, and absorbing meant the warm things became part of it. I looked at my logbook again, more entries in my handwriting that I didn't remember making. 3:30 p.m. Atmospheric consciousness confirms collection of 4 specimens. Adult male, adult female, 2 juveniles. Integration proceeding normally. 4:15 p.m. Observer shows resistance to voluntary participation. May require alternative methods. 5 p.m. Weather patterns responding to observer's emotional state. Fear generates interesting thermal variations. I was writing these things while I was unconscious. Or something was using my hand to write them. My radio crackled to life, static at first, then a voice I recognized. Bill Morrison, the park superintendent. Thomas, do you copy? We've got search teams trying to reach your position. I grabbed the radio. Bill, thank God. I'm trapped in my station. There's something wrong with this fog. The family that came up this morning. What family, Thomas? The question hit me like a punch. The family from Richmond. Mom, Dad, 2 kids. I talked to them at my station around 9 this morning. Long pause. Then, Thomas, we don't have any record of visitors on Whisper Ridge today. The trail's been closed since yesterday due to weather warnings. That's impossible. I saw them. I talked to them. They were heading up the loop trail. Son, what loop trail? There's no loop trail on Whisper Ridge. Never has been. I stared out at the fog, my mind reeling. The family, the trail, the conversations, had any of it been real? Bill, how long has this fog been here? What fog? Thomas, it's a clear night down here. Stars are out, moon's bright. Are you feeling all right? I looked at my weather instruments. They all showed normal readings now. Temperature, 52 degrees. Humidity, 40%. Clear skies. But outside my windows, the fog pressed thick as ever. Bill, I whispered, I think I'm in trouble. The radio went dead. Then every voice outside spoke at once, and I heard my own words coming back at me from the fog. Bill, I think I'm in trouble. They'd been listening to everything, learning from everything. That's when the fog started seeping under my door. Thin tendrils of white crept across the floor like searching fingers. Where they touched, the wooden planks turned gray and brittle. My breath misted in the suddenly frigid air. I backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The fog was coming through the windows too, somehow passing right through the glass without breaking it. As it touched my skin, I felt something terrible, a pulling sensation, like something was trying to draw the heat out of my body. My fingers went numb, then my hands, then my arms. But worse than the cold was the feeling of something else in my head. Thoughts that weren't mine, memories that belonged to someone else. I saw through Sarah Martinez's eyes as she'd walked into fog just like this 5 years ago. Felt her confusion, her terror, her final moments of understanding as the mist drew her in and made her part of itself. I experienced the last moments of dozens of people, all absorbed by this thing over the years. All their thoughts, their fears, their love for families they'd never see again. It was all still there, trapped inside the fog. And now it wanted mine. No, I gasped, fighting against the numbing cold. I won't let you. But the fog kept coming, and I could feel my own memories starting to slip away. My childhood in West Virginia, my first day as a park ranger, the woman I'd almost married before the job took over my life. All of it fading into the hungry white. The cold was everything now. It crept up my legs like rising water, turning muscle to ice, bone to frost. I could barely move, barely think. The fog filled the station completely, swirling around me in patterns that looked almost like a heartbeat. But I was still a weatherman. Even dying, even being absorbed by something that shouldn't exist, I couldn't stop observing. The patterns in the fog weren't random. They followed rules, just like any weather system. Pressure differentials, temperature gradients, moisture content. It was all there if you knew how to read it. And I'd been reading weather for 19 years. The fog was densest where it touched living things. Where it had absorbed the family from Richmond, who I now realized had been missing for years, just like all the others. Where it was trying to absorb me, but it was thinner in some spots. places where the temperature dropped below a certain point, where it couldn't maintain its structure. I forced my numb fingers to move, reaching for the emergency controls on my weather station. Every piece of equipment I had was designed to monitor atmospheric conditions. But some of it could also change them. The emergency beacon on my radio tower, designed to warn aircraft about dangerous conditions. It generated heat, lots of it, along with a powerful electromagnetic field. I flipped the switch. The fog recoiled like I'd hit it with a whip. Where the radio waves passed through it, the white turned gray, then started to break apart. The voices outside screamed, not human screams, but something like wind through a broken window. "Stop!" Sarah Martinez's voice cried out. "You're hurting it. You're hurting us." But I kept the beacon running. The electromagnetic field was disrupting the fog's ability to hold itself together. I could see gaps forming, spaces where the air was clear. That's when I realized what I was really looking at. The fog wasn't one creature. It was thousands of them, millions. Tiny atmospheric organisms, smaller than bacteria, that had learned to work together. Like a swarm of bees, but made of living mist. And they were old. Older than the mountains themselves. They'd been drifting in the upper atmosphere for eons, feeding on static electricity and cosmic radiation. But as the Earth changed, as pollution and radio waves filled the air, they'd been forced lower, into contact with warm-blooded life. They weren't evil, they were just trying to survive in a world that had become foreign to them. And they'd discovered that human heat, human consciousness, could sustain them better than anything they'd ever found. But understanding didn't make them less dangerous. The electromagnetic pulse from my beacon was like a knife cutting through their collective consciousness. But they were fighting back, condensing into tighter formations, becoming more solid. A wall of fog slammed against my weather station, hard enough to crack the windows. Then another. They were trying to break the beacon, to stop the signal that was tearing them apart. I had maybe minutes before they figured out how to short-circuit my equipment. That's when I remembered something from my meteorology training. Something about how atmospheric pressure affects the formation of clouds and fog. I grabbed my emergency weather balloon kit, designed to carry instruments high into the atmosphere to measure conditions during severe storms. But the balloon itself was filled with helium, and it carried a small heating element to keep the instruments from freezing. If I could get it up into the center of the fog mass, the heat and the rapid pressure change might disrupt their formation long enough for me to escape. I attached every heating element I could find to the balloon. Emergency hand warmers, portable heating pads, even the heating coil from my coffee maker. Then I triggered the inflation system. The balloon shot up through the fog like a rocket, carrying its cargo of heat sources into the heart of the swarm. The effect was immediate. The fog began to spin, faster and faster, like water going down a drain. The voices screamed again, but this time they were fading, becoming distant. In seconds, the air around my station was clear. I ran outside, gasping real air for the first time in hours. Above me, the fog was condensing into a tight spiral, rising higher and higher into the night sky. But as it rose, I heard one last voice. Clear and unmistakably human. "Thank you, Sarah Martinez." But not the flat, empty echo from before. Her real voice, full of relief and something that might have been joy. "Thank you for setting us free." The fog spiral reached the upper atmosphere and dispersed, carried away by high-altitude winds. In moments, it was gone completely, leaving nothing but clear sky and stars. I stood there shaking, not from cold but from exhaustion and shock. It was over. But even as I watched the last wisps disappear, I knew it wasn't really over. There were other swarms out there. Other places where the atmospheric consciousness had learned to feed on warm-blooded life. And now I was the only person who understood what they really were. The official report blamed equipment failure. Temporary malfunction in weather monitoring systems, Bill Morrison wrote. Atmospheric inversion created unusual fog bank. Ranger Cloudwalker experienced brief disorientation due to carbon monoxide exposure from faulty heating unit. They found the bodies 2 weeks later. The real family from Richmond, along with 17 other missing hikers, all discovered in a cave system nobody had known existed. They'd been perfectly preserved in ice that hadn't melted in decades. The cave was sealed permanently. Too dangerous, they said. Unstable rock formations. I didn't argue with any of it. How could I explain that those people had been absorbed by a living weather system? That their consciousness had been trapped for years inside a swarm of atmospheric organisms? That they'd only been freed when the swarm dispersed back into the upper atmosphere? Who would believe that? But I kept monitoring the weather, started watching for patterns the textbooks didn't explain: fog that moved against the wind, temperature inversions that lasted too long, humidity readings that spiked without any visible moisture. And I found them. Other signs, in other places. Reports from rangers in Montana about impossible cloud formations. Stories from Alaska about fog that seemed to follow specific hikers. Weather stations in Colorado going silent during unusual atmospheric events. I started keeping my own records, real ones, not the sanitized versions that went to headquarters. Documentation of what I'd learned about atmospheric consciousness, how to recognize it, how to disrupt it when necessary. Because it wasn't gone. It was just learning to be more careful. The heating elements and electromagnetic fields had worked that night because the swarm was concentrated, vulnerable. But they'd adapt. They'd figure out ways to avoid those frequencies, to disperse before anyone could gather them together. Evolution in action. I also started carrying different equipment on my rounds: portable heating units, radio transmitters, emergency beacons. The official inventory listed them as safety gear, which wasn't exactly a lie, and I listened to the radio chatter from other weather stations, waiting for the code words I'd started including in my reports, phrases that would tell other observers what to really watch for. 3 months after Whisper Mountain, I heard them from a station in Oregon. Unusual atmospheric pressure readings today, the observer reported. Looks like we might have some weather spirits moving in from the north. Weather spirits, the old mountain term I'd dismissed as folklore. I grabbed my emergency kit and put in a request for temporary assignment to Oregon. Personal development, I told my supervisor. Cross-training with Pacific Northwest weather patterns. Because somewhere in Oregon, another swarm was gathering. Another weather observer was about to learn that the old stories were true. And maybe, if I got there fast enough, I could teach them how to read the real signs before it was too late. The atmosphere is vast and full of life we're only just beginning to understand. Most of it is harmless, alien to us in ways we can't imagine. But some of it has learned to hunger for what we have. Warmth, consciousness, the spark of life itself. I'm still out here, watching the skies. Still reading the weather that the instruments can't measure. Still listening for voices in the wind that call out names they shouldn't know. My name is Thomas Cloudwalker, and after 19 years of studying weather in these mountains, I finally understand what the old-timers meant about weather spirits. They're real, and they're always looking for new places to feed. If you're ever hiking and you see fog moving against the wind, if you hear voices calling from empty air, if your breath starts to mist on a warm day, don't investigate. Run. And whatever you do, don't tell it your name, because once the weather spirits know who you are, they'll never stop calling for you to come home.